Hey there, my awesome listeners. Welcome back to another heart-pounding werewolf shifter romance that's going to leave you absolutely breathless. I'm your host, and tonight we're diving into a story about fate, fire, and the kind of love that defies every rule. Picture this. What happens when the moon goddess pairs two wolves who are sworn enemies? When recognition burns like wildfire through your veins, but acceptance could destroy everything you've ever known. Our heroine, Sarah Blackwood, is about to find out the hard way. She's standing in the shadows of the Crimson Moon Pack territory, her heart hammering against her ribs, the metallic scent of blood thick in the air. She's here to save her captured brother, but she has no idea she's about to come face to face with her fated mate, the very alpha who's holding her family hostage. But what happens when fate intervenes in the most impossible way? Chapter 1. The bitter mountain wind carried the scent of pine, snow, and something far more dangerous, the musky, intoxicating fragrance of the Crimson Moon Pack. Sarah Blackwood pressed her back against the rough bark of an ancient oak, her wolf senses on high alert as she surveyed the sprawling compound below. Her brother Marcus had been missing for 3 days, and every instinct screamed that he was being held somewhere within those stone walls. "This is suicide," she whispered to herself, her breath forming small clouds in the frigid air. The Blackwood and Crimson Moon Packs had been at war for over a century. If they caught her here, death would be a mercy. But Marcus was all the family she had left. Sarah adjusted the silver daggers strapped to her thighs and began her descent down the rocky slope. Her boots made no sound on the frozen ground, a skill she'd perfected during years of reconnaissance missions. The compound's outer perimeter was heavily guarded, but she'd studied their patrol patterns for weeks. She had exactly 4 minutes before the next sweep. The scent hit her like a physical blow when she was 50 yards from the main gate.
Pine, cedar.
Raw masculine power. And underneath it all, something that made her wolf rise up and howl with desperate recognition.
Mate.
"No," she gasped, stumbling backward. The word tore from her throat like a wounded animal's cry. Not possible. Not him. But her body betrayed her, every nerve ending coming alive with electric awareness. Her skin felt too tight, her heart raced, and a fierce heat pooled low in her belly. The mate bond, that sacred, unbreakable connection blessed by the moon goddess herself, was trying to snap into place. She forced herself to keep moving, even as her wolf clawed at her insides, demanding she follow that intoxicating scent to its source. The main building loomed ahead, its windows glowing with warm amber light. She could hear voices inside, rough masculine laughter that made her skin prickle with unease. Sarah slipped through a side window she'd identified earlier, landing silently in what appeared to be a storage room. The scent was stronger here, wrapping around her like silk and sin. Her hands shook as she reached for one of her daggers. "Focus," she commanded herself. "Find Marcus. Get out. Forget whatever twisted game the goddess is playing." She crept through the corridor, following the sound of voices toward what she hoped was a holding area. But with each step, that devastating masculine scent grew stronger until she could barely think past the primal need clawing at her chest. The voices were coming from behind a heavy oak door at the end of the hallway. Sarah pressed her ear against the wood and heard her brother's voice, weak but alive. "Won't tell you anything about our pack's defenses," Marcus was saying. "Kill me if you want, but I'll die before I betray my family." A low chuckle followed, rich and deep and absolutely lethal. "Brave words, pup. But we both know you'll break eventually. They always do." Sarah's blood turned to ice. She knew that voice. Cale Thornwick, the Crimson Moon Alpha. The monster who'd led the raid that killed her parents 5 years ago. The wolf who'd been hunting her pack ever since. And apparently, according to the cruel twist of fate, her destined mate. She burst through the door without thinking, silver daggers gleaming in the lamplight. "Get away from him." The room fell silent. Marcus was chained to a chair in the center, his face bloodied but his eyes alert. 3 massive wolves in human form surrounded him, all turning toward her with predatory smiles. But it was the man leaning against the far wall who stole her breath. Cale Thornwick was even more devastating in person than in the intelligence photos she'd memorized. Well over 6 feet of solid muscle, with jet black hair and the kind of sharp, aristocratic features that belonged in ancient paintings of warrior kings. His eyes were the color of aged whiskey, and when they met hers across the room, she felt the mate bond slam into place with the force of a lightning strike. His nostrils flared, and she watched his pupils dilate as her scent reached him. For a moment that lasted an eternity, they simply stared at each other, both caught in the web the moon goddess had spun. Then his expression hardened into something cold and cruel. Well, well. Little Sarah Blackwood. Come to rescue her brother like a good little soldier. Let him go, she snarled, raising her daggers. The silver gleamed, and she was gratified to see several of his pack members take a step back. This is between our packs, not him. Cale pushed off the wall with fluid grace, and she had to fight every instinct not to run to him. The mate bond was screaming at her to submit, to offer her throat, to let him claim her right here in front of everyone. Instead, she shifted into a defensive stance. Everything is between our packs, little wolf, he said softly, his voice like velvet over steel. Including you. He moved faster than her eyes could track, crossing the distance between them in the span of a heartbeat. Her daggers were knocked from her hands before she could even think to use them, and suddenly she was pressed against the stone wall with 200 pounds of dominant alpha male caging her in. The scent of him was overwhelming this close, cedar and pine, and something uniquely Cale that made her wolf whimper with need. His hands were braced on either side of her head, his body radiating heat that made her skin tingle. You smell like moonlight and wildflowers, he murmured, his breath warm against her ear. And you're mine. I belong to no one, she spat, even as her treacherous body arched toward him. Especially not a murdering bastard like you. His laugh was low and dark. The goddess has quite the sense of humor, doesn't she? Pairing the alpha who destroyed your family with their precious daughter. His fingers trailed down her throat, and she shivered despite herself. But bonds can't be broken, little mate. Even ones as inconvenient as ours. I'd rather die than be claimed by you. Would you? His eyes glittered dangerously. Even if it meant saving your brother's life? Sarah's heart stopped. She looked past Cale's shoulder to where Marcus watched with growing horror and understanding. No, Marcus said hoarsely. Sarah, don't. Whatever he's offering, don't. Quiet, Cale ordered without looking away from her. The adults are talking. He leaned closer until his lips were almost touching her ear. Here's my offer, little wolf. Accept the mate bond. Let me claim you properly, in front of both our packs. Become my Luna, and your brother goes free. And if I refuse? His smile was all teeth. Then you both die. But not quickly. Sarah closed her eyes, feeling the mate bond pulse between them like a living thing. Every instinct, every fiber of her being, screamed at her to say yes. To let this dangerous, devastating man mark her as his and damn the consequences. But he was her enemy. The monster who'd orphaned her, who'd hunted her pack, who'd shown no mercy to anyone who carried her name. I need time to think, she whispered. You have until the next full moon, Cale said, stepping back just far enough that she could breathe again. 3 days, little mate. 3 days to decide if you're brave enough to save your brother, or selfish enough to let him pay for your pride. He gestured to his men, who immediately moved to flank her. Escort our guest to the guest quarters. Make sure she's comfortable. As rough hands grabbed her arms, Sarah met her brother's eyes. The apology there broke her heart. I'm sorry, Marcus mouthed. But as they dragged her from the room, all she could think about was the way Cale's scent clung to her skin, and how desperately her wolf wanted to go back to him. 3 days to choose between her freedom and her family. 3 days to decide if she could stomach being mated to her parents' killer. 3 days to figure out why the moon goddess had cursed them both with the cruelest fate imaginable. The door slammed shut behind her, but she could still feel Cale's eyes burning into her soul. The mate bond hummed between them, unbreakable and undeniable. And somewhere in the darkness of her heart, Sarah was terrified that she already knew what her answer would be. Chapter 2. The guest quarters were a mockery of hospitality, a beautifully appointed prison cell with silk curtains and a roaring fireplace. Sarah paced the length of the room like the caged wolf she was, her bare feet silent on the plush Persian rug. They'd taken her weapons, her boots, even her jacket, leaving her in nothing but dark jeans and a thin black sweater that did nothing to ward off the chill seeping through the stone walls. Or maybe the cold was coming from inside her, from the hollow ache where her heart used to be.
Mate.
The word whispered through her mind like a prayer and a curse combined. Every cell in her body recognized Cale Thornwick as her other half, the one the moon goddess had chosen for her before she was even born. But how could fate be so cruel? How could the same divine force that had blessed her parents with their beautiful love story condemn her to this nightmare? A soft knock interrupted her spiraling thoughts. The door opened to reveal a petite woman with auburn hair and kind green eyes, carrying a tray of food that smelled like heaven. "I thought you might be hungry," the woman said, setting the tray on a small table by the window. "I'm Elena, by the way, the Pax healer." "I'm not eating anything from this place," Sarah said coldly, though her stomach betrayed her with a loud growl. She hadn't eaten since yesterday morning. Elena's smile was gentle but knowing. "It's not poisoned, if that's what you're worried about. Cale may be many things, but he'd never harm his mate. The bond wouldn't let him, even if he wanted to." "He's not my mate," Sarah snapped. "Not until I accept him. And I won't." "Won't you?" Elena moved to the fireplace, adding another log with practiced ease. "I've been the pack healer for 15 years. I've seen a lot of matings, but never anything like what I felt in that room tonight. The bond between you two is extraordinary." Sarah laughed bitterly. "Extraordinary. That's one word for this disaster." Elena turned to face her, and there was something ancient in her green eyes. "The moon goddess doesn't make mistakes, child, even when her gifts seem like curses." "My parents are dead because of him," Sarah said through gritted teeth. "My pack is scattered. My brother is chained up like an animal. Tell me how any of this is a gift." "I can't," Elena admitted. "But I can tell you that Cale hasn't eaten or slept since you arrived. He's standing guard outside your door right now, actually. Has been for the past 4 hours." Sarah's heart skipped a beat. She could smell him, that intoxicating mixture of cedar and masculine power that made her wolf restless with longing. But she forced herself to remain still. "He's probably making sure I don't escape. Is he?" Elena moved toward the door. "Or is he protecting you from the pack members who don't understand why their alpha would offer mercy to a Blackwood?" She paused with her hand on the handle. "Think about it.
And eat something."
"You'll need your strength for whatever's coming." After Elena left, Sarah found herself drawn to the window. The compound was quiet, most of the pack asleep, but she could see guards patrolling the perimeter. And there, just below her window, stood a familiar silhouette.
Cale.
He was leaning against a stone wall, his face tilted up toward her window. Even from this distance, she could feel the intensity of his gaze. The mate bond stretched between them like a golden thread, pulsing with unspoken need and desperate longing. Before she could stop herself, she pressed her palm to the glass. He straightened immediately, and she saw his hand rise as if to mirror hers. For a moment that lasted an eternity, they stayed like that, separated by glass and hatred, but connected by something far stronger than either. Then Sarah jerked her hand back, stumbling away from the window. What was wrong with her? This man had destroyed everything she'd ever loved. She shouldn't feel this pull toward him, shouldn't want to comfort the pain she could feel radiating through their bond. She forced herself to eat Elena's soup, though every bite felt like betrayal. But she needed strength if she was going to find a way out of this mess. There had to be another option, something that didn't involve surrendering herself to her family's killer. "But he is your mate," her wolf whispered. "He would protect us, love us, die for us." "Shut up," she hissed aloud. "He's the enemy." "Then why can you feel his pain? Why does his loneliness echo in your chest?" Sarah squeezed her eyes shut, but she couldn't block out the sensations flowing through the mate bond. Kale's restless energy, his confusion, his bone-deep exhaustion, and underneath it all, a grief so profound it made her gasp. "Stop it," she whispered. "I don't want to feel this." But the bond only grew stronger, pulling at her heart with invisible chains. She could sense him moving, pacing the courtyard below like she'd been pacing her room. Both of them trapped by forces beyond their control. A crash from somewhere in the building jolted her from her thoughts. Raised voices followed, angry and concerned. Sarah moved to the door, pressing her ear against the wood. "Can't be serious about this, Kale. She's a Blackwood." "I'm aware of what she is, Damien." Kale's voice was cold as winter wind, but she could hear the strain underneath. Through the bond, she felt his frustration spike. "Her father killed your brother," another voice said. "Martin would roll over in his grave if he knew you were considering." "Enough." The word cracked like a whip. "I don't need reminders of what I've lost. But the bond is sacred. Even you wouldn't suggest I defy the moon goddess herself." "The goddess makes mistakes sometimes," Damien argued. "This has to be one of them. Mate her to someone else. Find a way to break." The sound of a fist hitting a wall cut him off. Sarah flinched at the violence in it, and through the bond, she felt Kale's rage like a living thing. "Never," he snarled. "She's mine. I don't care if she's Satan's daughter. She belongs to me, and I will kill anyone who suggests otherwise." The possessiveness in his voice sent heat spiraling through her body, even as her mind recoiled from it. This was exactly what she'd been afraid of, being claimed like property, reduced to nothing more than a prize to be won. But the mate bond whispered differently. It spoke of protection, devotion, a love so fierce it would burn the world down before allowing harm to come to her. "He would die for us," her wolf said softly. "Just as we would die for him." "I won't," Sarah whispered. "I can't." The voices in the hallway had moved away, but she could still feel Kale's presence, like a brand against her skin. The need to go to him, to offer comfort for whatever pain was driving him to pace like a caged animal, was almost overwhelming. Instead, she climbed into the massive bed and pulled the covers over her head. 2 more days. She just had to survive 2 more days, and then what? Watch Marcus die? Let herself be claimed by her enemy? Run and spend the rest of her life fighting a mate bond that would never let her go? Sleep came in fragments, filled with dreams of golden eyes and desperate whispers, of hands that burned like brands, and a voice that called her name like a prayer. She woke several times to find herself reaching for someone who wasn't there, her body aching with need she didn't want to acknowledge. Near dawn, she was pulled from restless sleep by the sound of her door opening. She kept perfectly still, her breathing steady, as footsteps crossed the room to stop beside her bed. Kale's scent wrapped around her like a warm blanket, cedar and pine, and something uniquely him. She could feel the heat of his body, could hear his carefully controlled breathing. Through the bond, his emotions hit her in waves, longing so intense it made her chest tight, desperation that tasted like copper, and underneath it all, a tenderness that made her want to weep. "I'm sorry," he whispered, so quietly she almost missed it. "I'm sorry it has to be me. I'm sorry for what I took from you. But I can't let you go. The goddess help me, I can't." She felt the whisper of fingertips against her hair, there and gone so quickly she might have imagined it. Then his footsteps retreated, and the door closed with a soft click. Sarah lay in the darkness, her heart hammering against her ribs. The mate bond hummed with the echo of his presence, carrying the scent of his grief and the weight of his regret. For the first time since this nightmare began, she wondered if Kale Thornwick was as trapped as she was. And that terrifying possibility scared her more than anything else. 2 days left to decide. 2 days to choose between her freedom and her brother's life. 2 days to figure out if the enemy she'd been taught to hate might actually be the other half of her soul. The mate bond pulsed once, carrying a whisper of desperate hope, and Sarah buried her face in her pillow to muffle her sob. Chapter 3. Sarah woke to the sound of shattering glass and a woman's scream. She bolted upright, her wolf senses immediately on high alert. The scream came again, high and terrified, followed by masculine shouts and the unmistakable sound of claws on stone. Whatever was happening, it was close, maybe one floor down. She rushed to the window, but the courtyard below was empty except for a few guards who were running toward the main building. Through the mate bond, she felt Kale's alarm spike into something close to panic. The door to her room burst open without ceremony. Kale stood in the doorway, his hair disheveled and his eyes wild with concern. He was shirtless, wearing only black jeans, as if he'd been pulled from sleep. "Are you hurt?" he demanded, crossing to her in 3 long strides. His hands hovered over her arms, not quite touching but close enough that she could feel their warmth. "I'm fine," she said, stepping back instinctively. "What's happening?" Relief flooded through the bond so intensely it made her knees weak. "Rogue attack," he said tersely. 3 of them made it past the perimeter. "They're after you." "Me?" Sarah's blood turned to ice. "How do they even know I'm here?" Kale's jaw clenched. "Because someone told them. Someone in my pack is feeding information to your enemies." Before she could process that bombshell, another scream echoed through the building, followed by an inhuman howl that made her skin crawl. "Stay here," Kale ordered, moving toward the door. "I'll send. Like hell." Sarah grabbed his arm, and the moment her skin touched his, electricity shot through both of them. She saw his pupils dilate, felt his sharp intake of breath through the bond. But she forced herself to focus. "If they're here for me, I'm not hiding while your pack gets hurt because of it." "You don't understand," Kale said roughly. "These aren't just any rogues. They're Shadowborn, wolves who've been twisted by dark magic. They feel no pain, know no fear, and they won't stop until they complete their mission or die trying." Another crash, this one much closer. Sarah could smell blood now, thick and metallic in the air. "Then we better make sure they die first," she said grimly. "I need weapons." Kale stared at her for a long moment, and she felt his internal struggle through the bond. Every instinct he had as an alpha, as her mate, was screaming at him to lock her away somewhere safe. But there was also grudging admiration bleeding through their connection. "There's an armory 2 floors down," he said finally. "But you stay with me. If something happens to you—" "Nothing will happen to me," Sarah cut him off. "I can take care of myself." His smile was sharp and dangerous. "I know you can, little wolf. That's what terrifies me." They moved through the corridors like shadows, Kale leading the way with predatory grace. The sounds of battle grew louder as they descended, snarls, screams, the wet sound of claws meeting flesh. Through the windows, Sarah could see pack members in various stages of shift fighting creatures that looked like wolves but moved wrong, as if their joints bent in directions they shouldn't. "How many of your pack know about the mate bond?" she asked quietly as they rounded a corner. "My inner circle. Maybe a dozen others." Kale's voice was grim. "But someone with access to sensitive information had to have betrayed us. The Shadowborn don't just randomly attack. They're tools, weapons aimed at specific targets." They reached the armory without incident, and Sarah felt her heart sing at the sight of so many beautiful, deadly implements. She selected 2 curved silver daggers and a crossbow loaded with silver bolts, the familiar weight of the weapons grounding her in a way nothing else could. "You know," she said conversationally as she strapped the daggers to her thighs, "most alphas would be disturbed by how excited their mate gets around weapons." Kale's eyes darkened as he watched her hands move over the blade hilts. "Most alphas don't have mates who look like deadly angels when armed. It's arousing." Heat flooded through her at the hunger in his voice, and she had to look away before she did something stupid, like kiss him senseless against the weapon racks. A howl echoed from the floor above them, followed by Elena's voice shouting for help. "The infirmary," Kale breathed, his face going white. "They're after the injured." They ran through the corridors, no longer caring about stealth. When they reached the infirmary, the door had been torn off its hinges. Inside, Elena was backed against a wall, clutching a silver scalpel while a massive creature stalked toward her. It had once been a wolf, but corruption had twisted it into something nightmarish: patchy fur, yellow eyes that glowed with unnatural light, and claws that were too long and sharp to be natural. "Hey, ugly," Sarah called out, raising her crossbow. "Pick on someone who can fight back." The creature spun toward her with inhuman speed, but Sarah was ready. Her silver bolt took its center mass, and it screamed, a sound no natural wolf should be able to make. Black ichor poured from the wound instead of blood, and the thing kept coming despite the silver burning through its system. Kale shifted mid-leap, his human form melting into a massive black wolf with golden eyes. He hit the shadow-born creature from the side, his jaws clamping down on its throat. They rolled across the floor in a tangle of fur and claws, destroying medical equipment in their wake. Sarah couldn't get a clear shot with them moving so fast, so she dropped the crossbow and drew her daggers instead. When the creatures separated for a heartbeat, she struck, driving both blades deep between the Shadowborn's ribs. It convulsed once, and went still, the unnatural light fading from its eyes. Kale shifted back to human form, gloriously naked and streaked with black ichor. "Are you hurt?" he demanded, his hands running over her arms and torso, checking for injuries. "I'm fine," she gasped, suddenly aware of how close they were standing. His hands on her skin felt like brands, sending heat spiraling through her body despite the carnage around them. "Thank the goddess," Elena said shakily from behind them. "I thought I was done for." "How many more?" Sarah asked, reluctantly stepping back from Kale's intoxicating warmth. "That was the last one," came a voice from the doorway. A tall man with sandy hair and familiar golden eyes stood there, his clothes torn and bloody. "We got the other two, but barely." "Damien." Kale acknowledged his beta with a nod. "Casualties. 3 injured, none dead. We got lucky." Damien's gaze flicked to Sarah with barely concealed hostility. "Though I'm sure it's just a coincidence that Shadowborn attacked the same night our prisoner arrived." "She's not a prisoner," Kale said coldly. "And she just helped save Elena's life." "Did she? Or did she orchestrate this whole thing to make herself look good?" Damien crossed his arms. "Think about it, Kale. Shadowborn are expensive. Someone paid a lot of money to send them after her. Why would her own people want her dead unless she's more valuable to them as a martyr than a prisoner?" Sarah finished quietly. The pieces were falling into place, and she didn't like the picture they formed. "My uncle. He's the only one who would benefit from my death right now." Kale's eyes sharpened. "Your uncle? Thomas Blackwood. My father's brother." Sarah's hands clenched into fists. "He's been trying to take control of what's left of our pack since my parents died. If I die here, he can claim I was murdered by the Crimson Moon Pack. It would unite the scattered survivors under his leadership. And if you accept the mate bond with me," Kale said slowly, "you'd be beyond his reach. Protected by alliance laws. Which is exactly what he can't allow." Sarah laughed bitterly. "He'd rather see me dead than mated to his enemy." Through the mate bond, she felt Kale's fury building like a storm. The air around him began to shimmer with barely contained power, and she had to resist the urge to step closer, to offer comfort for his rage. "So your own uncle sold you out to assassins," Damien said, his hostility melting into something like sympathy. "That's cold, even for a Blackwood." "Hey," Sarah snapped. "Not all of us are backstabbing bastards." "Just most of you," he shot back, but there was no real heat in it. "Enough," Kale said sharply. "Damien, double the guards and change the patrol schedules. If there's a traitor in our pack feeding information out, I want them found." He turned to Elena. "How are the injured?" "They'll live," Elena said, already moving to check on the patients who'd been hiding in the back rooms during the attack. "But we'll need supplies from town. The creatures destroyed most of my equipment. I'll send someone first thing in the morning." Kale looked at Sarah, and the intensity in his golden eyes made her breath catch. "We need to talk. Privately." Sarah nodded, suddenly exhausted. The adrenaline was wearing off, leaving her shaky and drained. Through the bond, she could feel Kale's similar fatigue, along with something deeper, a bone-deep weariness that spoke of years of fighting, years of loss. They walked back to her room in silence, but it was a different kind of quiet than before. The shared battle had changed something between them, created a foundation of trust that hadn't existed an hour ago. When they reached her door, Kale hesitated. "Sarah, what you did tonight. Protecting Elena, fighting beside me. That wasn't the action of someone who hates this pack." "I don't hate your pack," she said quietly. "I hate what you did to mine. But innocent people shouldn't suffer because of old grudges." "Your parents," he said suddenly. "Tell me about them." Sarah stiffened. "Why?" "Because I need to understand. Help me understand why accepting this bond feels like betraying them." She studied his face in the dim hallway light, looking for signs of mockery or manipulation. But all she saw was genuine curiosity and something that might have been regret. "They were good people," she said finally. "Kind, fair leaders who believed in protecting the innocent above all else. They—" She swallowed hard. "They died defending pack members who couldn't shift. Children and elders who were caught in the crossfire of a war they never wanted." Kale was quiet for a long moment. "I remember that night," he said softly. "The raid that killed them." Sarah's blood turned to ice. "You were there?" "I led it." The words fell between them like stones. "My brother Martin had been killed 3 days earlier in a Blackwood ambush. I was not thinking clearly. I wanted revenge, and I didn't care who got hurt in the process." "So you burned our village," Sarah whispered. "Killed dozens of innocent people." "Yes." His voice was rough with old pain. "And I've regretted it every day since. Not because it started this war, but because it made me into something I never wanted to be. A monster." The mate bond carried his self-loathing like a physical weight, pressing against her chest until she could barely breathe. Part of her wanted to offer comfort, to ease the pain that was radiating from him in waves. But the larger part, the part that had spent 5 years dreaming of revenge, recoiled from his confession. "Why are you telling me this?" she asked. "Because you deserve the truth. All of it." Kale met her eyes, and she saw something break open in his expression. "I can't change what I did. I can't bring back your parents or undo the pain I've caused. But I can promise you that if you accept this bond, if you become my mate, I will spend the rest of my life trying to be worthy of the gift the goddess gave me. And if I can't forgive you, if every time I look at you, all I see is the alpha who orphaned me, then we'll figure it out together," he said simply. "Because the alternative, losing you, isn't an option I'm willing to consider." Sarah felt tears burning behind her eyes. The mate bond was singing between them, carrying his sincerity, his desperation, his fierce protective love. But beneath that, her own heart was breaking with the weight of 5 years' worth of grief and rage. "I need more time," she whispered. "One more day," Kale said softly. "That's all we have left." He turned to go, then stopped. "Sarah? Tonight, when you fought beside me, I've never felt anything like that. The bond, the trust, the way we moved together like we'd been partners for years. Whatever you decide tomorrow, know that I will treasure that memory for the rest of my life." He disappeared into the shadows, leaving Sarah alone with her churning thoughts and the echo of his words. One more day to decide. One more day to choose between forgiveness and vengeance. One more day to figure out if love could bloom in the ashes of so much pain. The mate bond hummed softly, carrying whispers of hope and fear in equal measure. And for the first time since this nightmare began, Sarah wondered if choosing Kale might not be a surrender at all. Maybe it would be the beginning of something neither of them had dared to dream of. Freedom. Chapter 4. Dawn came too soon, and not soon enough. Sarah stood at her window, watching the first pale rays of sunlight creep across the mountain peaks. In a few hours, the moon would rise full and bright, and she would have to make her choice. Accept the mate bond with Kale Thornwick, the alpha who had killed her parents, or watch her brother die. The mate bond hummed constantly now, a golden thread connecting her to the man who was probably pacing his own room just as restlessly. Through their connection, she could feel his exhaustion, his desperate hope, and underneath it all, a bone-deep loneliness that made her chest ache. "He's been alone for so long," her wolf whispered. "Just like us." "Stop it," Sarah muttered, but her heart wasn't in the rebuke anymore. A soft knock interrupted her brooding. This time it wasn't Elena who entered, but Marcus himself, flanked by 2 guards who looked deeply uncomfortable with their orders. 5 minutes, one of them said gruffly. The Alpha's orders. Sarah flew to her brother, wrapping her arms around him despite the chains still binding his wrists. He was thinner than when she'd last seen him, with dark circles under his green eyes. But he was alive, and that was all that mattered. You look terrible, she said, trying to inject some lightness into her voice. Marcus managed a weak smile. You should see the other guy. His expression grew serious. Sarah, I heard what happened last night. You fought to protect his pack. I fought to protect innocent people, she corrected. There's a difference. Is there? Marcus studied her face with the intensity that had always made him such a good tracker. Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like you're starting to care about these wolves. Sarah pulled back, stung. How can you say that? After everything they've done to us. Because I know you, Marcus said gently. And I can smell him on you. The mate bond, it's already started, hasn't it? Heat flooded her cheeks. The scent thing was something she hadn't considered, but of course Marcus would notice. He'd always had the strongest nose in their pack. It doesn't matter, she said firmly. The bond doesn't change what he did. Doesn't it? Marcus's chains clinked as he shifted position. Sarah, I've been here for 3 days. I've seen how his pack operates, how they treat each other. These aren't the monsters we were raised to believe they were. They killed our parents. Kale killed our parents, Marcus corrected. And from what I've overheard, he's carried that guilt every day since. That doesn't excuse it, but sister, when was the last time you saw Uncle Thomas show even a fraction of the remorse I've witnessed from that alpha? Sarah flinched. Their uncle had never once expressed regret about anything, let alone the increasingly desperate measures he'd been taking to maintain control of their scattered pack. That doesn't make this right, she whispered. Maybe not, but it makes it complicated. Marcus reached for her hands with his bound ones. Sarah, if you choose him, you'll be safe. Protected. And more than that, you'll have a chance at happiness. Real happiness, not just survival. And if I can't forgive him, if every time I look at him, all I see is... Then you work through it. Together. Marcus's voice was firm. Because the alternative is death for both of us, and Uncle Thomas taking control of what's left of our people. Is that really what you want Mom and Dad's legacy to be? Before Sarah could answer, one of the guards cleared his throat. Time's up. As they led Marcus away, he called over his shoulder. Whatever you choose, I support you. But choose for the right reasons, not just for revenge. Alone again, Sarah sank onto the bed, her brother's words echoing in her mind. Was she clinging to her hatred because it was justified, or because it was easier than facing the terrifying possibility of forgiveness? The mate bond pulsed, carrying a wave of Kale's anxiety. He was worried about her, she realized. Not just whether she'd accept him, but whether she was eating, sleeping, taking care of herself. When had anyone cared about those things? Another knock at the door made her look up. This time it was Damien, Kale's beta, carrying a breakfast tray. His expression was carefully neutral, but she could sense the tension in his shoulders. The alpha thought you might be hungry, he said, setting the tray on the small table by the window. Thoughtful of him. Sarah didn't move from the bed. Let me guess. You're here to tell me all the reasons I should accept the bond. Damien's laugh was humorless. Actually, I'm here to tell you why you shouldn't. That got her attention. Excuse me? You want the truth? The unvarnished, ugly truth about what accepting Kale as your mate would mean. Damien crossed his arms, his golden eyes hard. You'd be signing up for a lifetime of suspicion from half this pack. There will always be wolves who see you as the enemy, who question your loyalty, who whisper that you're here to destroy us from the inside. Sarah raised an eyebrow. Is this supposed to be discouraging me? I'm just getting started. Damien began pacing, his agitation clear. You'd be Luna to a pack that's been at war for over a century. That means making decisions that could get people killed. It means being responsible for the safety and welfare of nearly 300 wolves, most of whom will never fully trust you. And Kale himself is no prize, Damien continued, his voice getting sharper. He's moody, brooding, and carries more guilt than any one person should. He has nightmares about every life he's taken, every mistake he's made. He'll try to protect you from everything, including yourself, and it will drive you insane. Despite everything, Sarah felt a smile tugging at her lips. You're really bad at this whole discouragement thing. Damien stopped pacing and looked at her in surprise. What? You're describing a man who takes responsibility for his actions, who cares deeply about his people's welfare, and who would put my safety above his own comfort. Sarah stood up, moving to the window. Those aren't flaws, Damien. Those are the qualities of a good leader and a good mate. He killed your parents, Damien said quietly. How do you get past that? Sarah was quiet for a long moment, watching the morning light play across the mountains. I don't know if I can, she said finally. But Marcus is right about one thing. Clinging to hatred hasn't made me happy. It's just made me tired. And if you can't forgive him, if you accept the bond but spend the rest of your life resenting him for it, then we'll both be miserable, Sarah admitted. But at least we'll be alive to work through it. Damien studied her for a long moment. You know what the strangest thing is? I came in here hoping to talk you out of accepting him. Why? Because I've been his beta for 10 years, and I've never seen him as vulnerable as he's been these past 3 days. If you accept the bond and then reject him emotionally, it will destroy him in ways that losing a battle never could. The mate bond carried a fresh wave of Cale's loneliness, and Sarah felt her heart clench in response. What if I told you that I'm just as scared as he is? Then I'd say you're both idiots who deserve each other, Damien said dryly. But I'd also say that might be the first foundation of a real relationship either of you has ever had. After Damien left, Sarah found herself actually eating the breakfast Cale had sent. The food was simple but delicious: scrambled eggs with herbs, fresh bread, and coffee that was strong enough to wake the dead. Through the mate bond, she felt a flutter of pleasure when he realized she was eating. Such a small thing, caring whether she was fed. But it spoke to something deeper than political alliance or physical attraction. The morning passed in a blur of nervous energy and circular thinking. Elena stopped by with medical supplies and gentle encouragement. Other pack members found excuses to walk past her door, their curious glances carrying a mixture of hostility and hope. As afternoon faded toward evening, Sarah felt Cale's anxiety spike through the bond. The full moon would rise soon, and tradition demanded that her answer be given under its light. She was standing at the window, watching the sun sink behind the mountains, when she felt him approaching. The bond sang with recognition, and her pulse quickened despite her best efforts to remain calm. The door opened without a knock, and Cale stepped inside. He was dressed formally in black pants and a white shirt that emphasized the breadth of his shoulders. His dark hair was still damp from a shower, and the scent of cedar and pine filled the room. "It's time," he said simply. Sarah nodded, not trusting her voice. Through the bond, she could feel the tight rein he was keeping on his emotions, hope and terror warring in equal measure. "Before we go," she said, "I need to ask you something." Cale went very still. "Anything. If I accept the bond, if I become your mate and your Luna, what happens to the war between our packs? What happens to the wolves who are still loyal to my uncle?" "The war ends," Cale said without hesitation. "Alliance through mating bonds is sacred law. Any Blackwood wolf who wants sanctuary with us will have it. As for your uncle..." His expression darkened. "If he continues to threaten you or your brother, I will deal with him personally. And if some of your pack can't accept me as Luna, then they're free to leave and find another pack," Cale said firmly. "I won't force anyone to stay who can't show you the respect you deserve. But Sarah, most of them will come around, especially once they see what I already know." "What's that?" Cale stepped closer, and the mate bond hummed with electricity. "That you're exactly the kind of Luna this pack needs. Strong enough to fight beside us, compassionate enough to protect the innocent, and brave enough to forgive even your enemies." "I haven't forgiven you yet," Sarah said quietly. "I know, but you're considering it, and that's more than I dared to hope for 3 days ago." They stood in silence for a moment, the weight of the decision hanging between them like a physical thing. Outside, Sarah could hear the pack gathering in the courtyard, their voices a low murmur of anticipation. "There's something else," Cale said, his voice carefully controlled. "If you accept the bond, the claiming, it doesn't have to happen right away. We can take time, let you adjust, let the emotional connection grow before the physical one." Sarah felt her cheeks warm. She'd been trying not to think about that aspect of mating, but it was unavoidable. The claiming would involve marking, biting, and quite probably a lot more than that if the romance novels she'd hidden under her bed as a teenager were anything to go by. "That's considerate of you," she managed. Cale's smile was rueful. "I may be a monster, but I'm not a rapist. When you come to my bed, I want it to be because you want to be there, not because tradition demands it." The mate bond carried his sincerity, along with a heat that made her skin tingle. Part of her was surprised to realize that the idea of being claimed by him wasn't entirely unappealing. The bond was already making her hyper-aware of his physical presence, the way his shirt stretched across his chest, the strong line of his jaw, the way his eyes darkened when he looked at her. "We should go," she said, before she could lose her nerve. Cale offered her his arm, and after a moment's hesitation, she took it. The simple contact sent warmth racing up her arm, and she felt a sharp intake of breath through the bond. They walked through the corridors in silence, but it was different from the heavy quiet of the past few days. This felt charged with possibility, electric with the potential of what was about to unfold. The courtyard was packed with wolves from both packs. Word had spread quickly about the potential mating, and it seemed like everyone wanted to witness this moment of history. Sarah could see Marcus near the front of the crowd, his chains gone and his eyes bright with hope. In the center of the courtyard stood an ancient stone altar, carved with symbols that predated both their packs. The full moon was just rising over the mountains, bathing everything in silver light. Cale led her to the altar and turned to face the crowd. His voice carried clearly in the crisp night air. "We are gathered here under the light of the full moon to witness a sacred choice," he began. "The moon goddess has blessed me with a fated mate, and tonight, she will give her answer to the bond between us." All eyes turned to Sarah, and she felt the weight of their expectations like a physical thing. Some faces were hopeful, others skeptical, a few openly hostile. But in the front row, she saw Elena's encouraging smile and Marcus's steady gaze. "Sarah Blackwood," Cale said, turning to face her. "Do you accept me, Cale Thornwick, as your fated mate? Do you choose to bind your life to mine, your pact to mine, your future to mine, for as long as we both shall live?" The question hung in the air like a challenge and a prayer combined. Through the mate bond, Sarah felt Cale's desperate hope, his fear of rejection, his overwhelming love for a woman he barely knew but recognized as his other half. She thought about her parents, about the life they'd built together despite the odds against them. She thought about Marcus, about the pack members who were counting on her to make the right choice. She thought about Thomas and his cruel ambitions, and the war that had already cost them so much. But mostly, she thought about the man standing before her, offering his heart and his life despite knowing she might reject both. "I do," she said, her voice carrying clearly across the courtyard. "I accept the mate bond. I accept you." The crowd erupted in cheers, but Sarah barely heard them. Cale's face had transformed with joy and relief, and the mate bond exploded between them like fireworks, sending pleasure racing through every nerve ending. He cupped her face in his hands, his thumbs brushing away tears she didn't realize she was shedding. "Thank you," he whispered, his voice rough with emotion. "I swear to you, I will spend every day of my life proving worthy of this gift." "And I swear to you," Sarah said, reaching up to touch his cheek, "that I will try to forgive the past and build a future with you." When he kissed her, soft and reverent under the light of the full moon, the mate bond snapped fully into place. Sarah felt it like a golden chain wrapping around her heart, unbreakable and eternal. For better or worse, she was his now, and perhaps, just perhaps, that wouldn't be the curse she'd always feared. Perhaps it would be the blessing she'd never dared to dream of.
Chapter 5.
The mating ceremony was followed by a feast that lasted well into the night. Sarah found herself seated at Kale's right hand at the high table, overwhelmed by the constant stream of pack members offering congratulations and cautious acceptance. The mate bond hummed steadily between them, carrying Kale's protective satisfaction and her own nervous energy. "You're not eating," Kale murmured, leaning close enough that his breath warmed her ear. The simple contact sent shivers down her spine, and she saw his eyes darken in response. "I'm still processing," she admitted, picking at the roasted venison on her plate. "This morning I was your prisoner. Now I'm your Luna. It's a lot to adjust to." "Regrets already?" His voice was light, but she felt the spike of anxiety through their bond. Sarah turned to study his profile, the strong jaw, the aristocratic nose, the way the torchlight played across his dark hair. 3 days ago, she would have seen only the face of her enemy. Now she found herself noticing the laugh lines around his eyes, the way he genuinely smiled when pack children approached the table with shy greetings. "No," she said finally. "No regrets. But questions." Kale's attention focused on her completely. "Ask me anything." "Where do I sleep tonight?" The question hung between them, loaded with implications. Around them, the feast continued, but Sarah felt as if they existed in a bubble of tension and possibility. "Wherever you're most comfortable," Kale said carefully. "My room is prepared for you, but if you'd prefer to remain in the guest quarters until—" "Your room," Sarah interrupted, surprised by her own certainty. "If we're doing this, we're doing it right. Besides," she added with a wry smile, "running away to the guest room on our mating night would send exactly the wrong message to both packs." Kale's smile was devastatingly sexy, practical and politically astute. "I knew there was a reason the goddess chose you for me." Heat pooled low in her belly at the hunger in his voice, but before she could respond, a commotion near the entrance caught their attention. A group of Blackwood wolves had arrived, led by a man Sarah recognized with a sinking heart. Thomas Blackwood strode into the courtyard like he owned it, his silver hair gleaming in the torchlight and his pale blue eyes scanning the crowd with predatory intensity. He was flanked by a dozen warriors, all armed and radiating hostility. The feast fell silent as every wolf in the courtyard sensed the sudden shift in atmosphere. Kale rose smoothly to his feet, and Sarah felt his power ripple through the air like heat waves. "Uncle Thomas," Sarah said, standing as well. "How unexpected." Thomas's gaze fixed on her, and his expression twisted with disgust.
"Sarah."
"I came as soon as I heard about your capture, ready to negotiate for your release. Imagine my surprise to learn that you've already been compromised." "Careful," Kale said softly, his voice carrying the promise of violence. "You're speaking about my mate." "Your mate?" Thomas laughed, the sound sharp and bitter. "She's a Blackwood. Our blood doesn't mate with murderers and pack killers." Sarah felt Kale's rage spike through the bond, but she placed a restraining hand on his arm. This was her battle to fight. "Our blood," she said, stepping forward, "has been shed for a century in a war that serves no one but your ambition. I'm offering a chance for peace, Uncle. An end to the dying."
"Peace."
Thomas spat. "You call surrendering to our enemies peace? Your parents would be ashamed." "My parents," Sarah said, her voice ringing across the silent courtyard, "believed in protecting the innocent above all else. This alliance will save lives on both sides." That's what they would have wanted. What they would have wanted, Thomas snarled, was for their daughter to remember her place and her duty to her pack. "I am remembering my duty," Sarah shot back. "My duty to the wolves who are still alive, not to the ghosts of the past." Thomas's face darkened. "You're not fit to lead if you can't see the truth. This isn't an alliance, it's a conquest. He'll use you until he gets what he wants, then discard you like the traitor you are." The words hit harder than they should have, carrying the weight of Sarah's own fears. Through the bond, she felt Kale's flash of hurt that she might believe such accusations. "That's enough," Kale said, moving to stand beside her. His presence was solid and reassuring, a reminder that she wasn't facing this alone. "You came to my territory under a flag of truce, Blackwood. I suggest you remember that." "Truce." Thomas laughed again. There can be no truce between our packs as long as you draw breath. But perhaps we can come to an understanding.
His cold gaze shifted to Sarah.
Return home with me now, renounce this farce of a mating, and I'll consider your temporary madness a result of captivity and coercion. And if I refuse? Thomas's smile was pure ice. Then you're no niece of mine, and no daughter of Alexander Blackwood deserves to carry his name. The threat hung in the air like poison. Around the courtyard, wolves from both packs tensed, hands drifting toward weapons. This could spiral into violence with one wrong word. Sarah felt the weight of every gaze, the pressure of expectations and loyalties pulling her in different directions. But when she reached through the mate bond, she found Cale's unwavering support. Not demanding or possessive, just there, solid, dependable. Then I guess I'm not a Blackwood anymore, she said clearly. I am Sarah Thornwick, Luna of the Crimson Moon Pack, and mate to Alpha Cale. If you can't accept that, uncle, then you're not welcome here. Thomas's face went white with fury. You foolish girl. You have no idea what you've just done. I know exactly what I've done, Sarah replied. I've chosen love over hate.
Hope over revenge.
If that makes me foolish, then I'll wear that label proudly. This isn't over, Thomas said, his voice deadly quiet. A Blackwood mated to a Thornwick is an abomination that cannot be allowed to stand. Mark my words, niece, this alliance will be your doom. He turned on his heel and stalked toward the exit, his warriors falling into formation behind him. At the courtyard entrance, he paused and looked back. Enjoy your victory, Thornwick. It won't last long. After they left, the feast resumed slowly, conversations subdued and wary. Sarah remained standing, her hands clenched into fists to hide their trembling. Through the bond, she felt Cale's concern and his barely leashed fury. He's not wrong about one thing, she said quietly, so only Cale could hear. This alliance has painted a target on both our backs. Let them come, Cale replied, his voice hard as granite. I've been fighting Blackwood threats for years. The only difference now is that I have something worth protecting. His fierce protectiveness should have bothered her. She'd always prided herself on not needing anyone's protection. Instead, it sent warmth spiraling through her chest. When was the last time someone had been willing to fight for her, rather than expecting her to fight alone? The feast wound down shortly after Thomas's departure, the festive mood dampened by the promise of future conflict. As pack members began to drift away to their homes, Sarah found herself alone with Cale in the torchlit courtyard. Ready? He asked, offering her his arm. Sarah nodded, though her stomach was alive with butterflies. The political part of the evening was over. Now came the personal reckoning, sharing a room, sharing a bed, navigating the intimate realities of a mating bond she'd entered for survival rather than love. Cale's quarters were in the highest tower of the compound, accessible by a winding stone staircase that left Sarah slightly breathless by the time they reached the top. He opened the heavy wooden door and gestured for her to enter first. The room was magnificent, twice the size of the guest quarters, with a massive stone fireplace, floor-to-ceiling windows that showcased the mountain vista, and furnishings that managed to be both elegant and masculine. But it was the enormous four-poster bed that dominated the space that made Sarah's breath catch. I can sleep on the couch, Cale said quickly, noting her hesitation. Or in one of the guest rooms. There's no pressure. Stop, Sarah said, turning to face him. We're mated now. That means sharing a bed, even if we're not ready for everything that usually entails. Cale's eyes darkened. What are you ready for? The question was asked quietly, but it sent heat racing through her veins. The mate bond carried his desire, carefully controlled but undeniably present. And to her surprise, she felt her own body responding, awakening to possibilities she hadn't allowed herself to consider. I don't know, she admitted. This is all new to me. You've never? Cale's eyebrows rose in surprise. Sarah felt her cheeks burn. I've been too busy trying to keep what was left of my pack alive to worry about romance. And after my parents died, the idea of trusting someone that completely seemed... She shrugged. Impossible. Kale crossed to her slowly, giving her plenty of time to retreat if she wanted to. When she didn't, he reached up to cup her face in his hands, his thumbs brushing across her heated cheeks. Then we'll take it slow, he said simply. We'll learn together. No expectations, no pressure. Just see what develops. What if nothing develops? She whispered. What if I can't get past what you did? What if the bond isn't enough to overcome everything between us? Then we'll figure out, Kale said, echoing Marcus's words from that morning. But Sarah, what I feel for you through this bond, it's not just desire or political convenience. It's recognition. Soul-deep, bone-deep recognition of my other half. The goddess doesn't make mistakes. Even when she pairs enemies? Kale's smile was soft and sad. Especially then. Maybe we needed to understand loss and pain before we could appreciate what we're being offered now. He leaned down and pressed a gentle kiss to her forehead, the contact sending warmth radiating through her entire body. Why don't you get ready for bed? I'll bank the fire and give you some privacy. Sarah nodded, grateful for his consideration. She found her few belongings had been moved to a dresser near the windows, along with some items she didn't recognize, nightgowns, robes, toiletries that smelled like wildflowers and moonlight. Elena's doing, Kale explained when he noticed her examining them. She thought you might want some things that were yours. The thoughtfulness of it made Sarah's throat tight with unexpected emotion. When was the last time anyone had anticipated her needs without being asked? She selected a simple cotton nightgown and disappeared into the adjoining bathroom to change. When she emerged, Kale had banked the fire to a warm glow and changed into sleep pants that rode low on his hips. His chest was bare, revealing scars that spoke of old battles and recent wounds that were still healing. Shadowborn claws, he said, noticing her gaze on a set of parallel marks across his ribs. From last night. Does it hurt? Not anymore. His eyes met hers. The mate bond seems to accelerate healing. Another gift from the goddess. They stood there for a moment, both suddenly aware of the intimacy of the situation. Sarah in her nightgown, Kale half-naked, the bed looming between them like an unspoken question. Which side do you prefer? Sarah asked, proud that her voice came out steady. I usually sleep on the left, but right it is then. She moved to the right side of the bed and pulled back the covers, trying to project confidence she didn't feel. Kale's smile was gentle as he turned off the lamps, leaving the room lit only by firelight. The bed dipped as he settled on his side, careful to maintain space between them. Good night, Sarah, he said softly. Good night, Kale. Sarah lay in the darkness, hyper-aware of every sound. Kale's breathing, the whisper of sheets when he moved, the steady rhythm of his heartbeat that she could somehow sense through the bond. She'd expected to feel trapped, suffocated by sharing such intimate space with a man she barely knew. Instead, she felt safe, protected. The constant background tension she'd carried for 5 years had eased, replaced by something she was afraid to name. Through the bond, she felt Kale's careful control, his determination not to crowd her or make demands she wasn't ready to meet. But underneath that was a warmth, a contentment that spoke of a man finally at peace after years of loneliness. Kale, she whispered into the darkness. Thank you for being patient with me. She felt his smile, through the bond. Thank you for giving me the chance to try. Sarah closed her eyes and let the steady presence of her mate's emotions lull her toward sleep. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, Thomas's threats, pack integration, the complex work of building trust and possibly love with a former enemy. But tonight, for the first time in years, she wasn't alone. And perhaps that was enough to build on. Chapter 6. Sarah woke to the sensation of strong arms wrapped around her waist and warm breath against her neck. Sometime during the night, she and Kale had gravitated toward each other, her back pressed against his chest, their legs tangled together beneath the sheets. The mate bond hummed with contentment, carrying the deep satisfaction of wolves who had found their perfect fit. For a moment, she let herself enjoy it, the solid warmth of him, the way her body seemed to melt into his, the absolute rightness of being held like something precious. Then reality crashed back, and she went rigid in his arms. Kale stirred immediately, his arms loosening but not releasing her entirely. "Good morning," he murmured, his voice rough with sleep. "We're—" Sarah swallowed hard, acutely aware of every point where their bodies touched. "We're very close." "We are." She could hear the smile in his voice. "Problem?" "I don't know yet." Sarah turned in his arms to face him, and immediately regretted it. Sleep-tousled hair, golden eyes still heavy with dreams, stubble that made him look dangerously masculine. He was devastating at close range. "Did you sleep well?" "Better than I have in years," Kale admitted, his thumb tracing lazy circles on her hip where his hand had settled. "You?" Sarah nodded, not trusting her voice. She had slept well, deeply and peacefully in a way she hadn't experienced since childhood. But admitting that felt like giving him too much power, acknowledging that she needed him in ways that went beyond political alliance. A sharp knock at the door interrupted the moment. "Alpha," came Damien's voice, tight with urgency. "We have a situation." Kale was out of bed instantly, grabbing a shirt from the chair. "What kind of situation?" "The kind that requires your immediate attention. Both of you." Sarah sat up, pulling the sheets around herself. Through the bond, she felt Kale's spike of alarm and his frustration at being interrupted during what should have been their first peaceful morning together. "Give us 5 minutes," Kale called out. They dressed quickly and in silence, but Sarah was hyper-aware of Kale's every movement, the play of muscles beneath his shirt, the efficient way he strapped on weapons, the predatory grace with which he moved. The mate bond was making her increasingly attuned to him, which was both thrilling and terrifying. When they opened the door, Damien's expression was grim. "There's been an incident at the southern border. 3 of our patrol wolves were found dead this morning, and there's evidence of a larger force moving through the area." "Thomas," Sarah said immediately. He didn't waste any time. "It gets worse," Damien continued as they walked swiftly through the corridors. One of the dead wolves was carrying this. He handed Kale a piece of parchment stained with blood. Kale read it quickly, his expression darkening. "He's demanding we turn over Sarah by sunset, or he'll consider it an act of war." "An act of war?" Sarah laughed harshly. "We've been at war for a century. What does he call what we've been doing?" "A family dispute," Kale said grimly. "This makes it official. Pack against pack, with all the formal alliances that entails." They reached the main hall, where pack leaders had already gathered around a large map spread across the oak table. Sarah recognized the area marked in red. It was strategically positioned to cut off several important trade routes and hunting grounds. "How many?" Kale asked without preamble. "At least 50, possibly more," replied Marcus, who looked pale but determined. Sarah was relieved to see her brother had been included in the war council despite his recent captivity. "They're using the old cave network to mask their numbers." 50 isn't enough to take our territory," Elena observed from her position near the windows. "So, what's his real game?" "He doesn't want our territory," Sarah said, studying the map. "He wants me, dead or disgraced, doesn't matter which. If he can provoke Kale into a rash response, he can paint himself as the victim defending his family's honor." "And if we don't respond?" asked one of the senior warriors. "Then he keeps escalating until we have no choice," Kale replied. "More patrol deaths, attacks on supply lines, maybe even raids on outlying settlements. He'll force our hand eventually." Sarah traced the marked positions on the map, her tactical training taking over. "There," she said, pointing to a narrow valley between 2 peaks. "If he's using the cave system, he'll have to funnel his forces through there to retreat. We could cut him off." "It's a trap," Damien said immediately. "He wants us to pursue him into terrain he's already scouted." "Of course it's a trap," Sarah agreed. "But it works both ways. He knows these mountains, but so do I. I grew up here." Kale was quiet, his golden eyes studying the map with intense focus. Through the bond, Sarah felt his internal struggle, the alpha who wanted to protect his territory warring with the mate who couldn't bear the thought of putting her in danger. "There's another option," he said finally. We could accept his challenge directly. Single combat between alphas. Winner takes all. Absolutely not, Sarah said immediately. Thomas is older than you, more experienced, and he fights dirty. Besides, if you lose, what happens to your pack? What happens to Marcus? If I win, the threat ends permanently. And if you lose, I'm left without a mate and Thomas gets everything he wants anyway. Sarah shook her head firmly. We do this smart, not heroic. The War Council continued for another hour, various strategies proposed and discarded. Finally, they settled on a two-pronged approach. A small force would engage Thomas's wolves in the valley, while a larger group circled around to cut off their retreat. It was risky, but it played to their advantages in numbers and knowledge of local terrain. I'm leading the flanking force, Sarah announced when the assignments were being made. Like hell you are, Kale said immediately. You're not even trained with our unit tactics. I'm trained with Blackwood tactics, which is what Thomas will be using. You need someone who can anticipate his moves. You're too valuable to risk in direct combat. Sarah felt her temper flare. Valuable as what? A political token? A prize to be protected? Valuable as my mate, Kale shot back, his own control fraying. As the future mother of my children. As the woman I can't live without. The declaration hung in the air between them, raw and honest, and completely unplanned. Around the table, the other wolves shifted uncomfortably, suddenly fascinated by the map. Kale, Sarah said softly, her anger dissolving in the face of his vulnerability. I appreciate what you're trying to do, but I won't be locked away like some helpless damsel. I'm a warrior. Let me fight. What if something happens to you? What if something happens to you? She countered. Do you think I could live with myself if you died protecting me while I cowered in safety? Through the bond, she felt his conflict, his desperate need to keep her safe warring with his respect for her strength and abilities. Finally, he nodded reluctantly. You stay with my unit, he said. And you follow orders no matter what. Agreed. The meeting broke up with assignments distributed and preparations begun. They would move at dusk, using the cover of darkness to get into position. As the others filed out, Sarah found herself alone with Kale in the suddenly quiet hall. You could have overruled me, she said. As Alpha, you had that right. As Alpha, yes. As your mate, no. Kale moved to the windows, looking out at the mountains where enemy forces waited. A partnership built on dominance and control isn't what the goddess intended for us. Sarah joined him at the window, close enough to feel his warmth, but not quite touching. What did she intend, do you think? Balance. Strength supporting strength. He glanced at her, and she saw the depth of emotion in his golden eyes. I've been alpha of this pack for 8 years. I've made life and death decisions, led them through wars and famines and disasters. But I've never been more terrified than I was at the thought of you in danger. Why? Because for the first time in my life, I have something to lose that would break me if it was gone. The honesty of it hit her like a physical blow. Through the bond, she felt the truth of his words, the way his entire world had shifted to center around her in just a few days. Kale, I know you don't love me yet, he said quietly. I know this bond was forced on both of us by circumstances beyond our control. But what I feel for you, it's already more real than anything I've ever experienced. Sarah reached out without thinking, her fingers interlacing with his. The contact sent warmth racing up her arm, and she felt his sharp intake of breath through the bond. I don't know what love feels like, she admitted. I've spent so many years focused on survival, on duty, on keeping what was left of my family alive. But this, what's happening between us, it's not what I expected. What did you expect? Resentment. Obligation. Having to force myself to tolerate your touch. She squeezed his fingers. Instead, I wake up in your arms and it feels right. Like coming home to something I didn't know I was missing. Kale turned to face her fully, his free hand coming up to cup her cheek. That's the bond talking. Is it? Or is it just us, finding our way to something real despite everything that should make it impossible? Before he could answer, she rose up on her toes and kissed him. It was soft and tentative at first, an exploration rather than a demand. But when he responded, his arms coming around her to pull her closer, heat flared between them like wildfire. This was different from their ceremonial kiss the night before. This was choice, not duty. Want, not obligation. When they finally broke apart, both were breathing hard. "We should prepare for tonight," Sarah said, though she made no move to step away from his embrace. "We should," Cale agreed, though his hands remained on her waist, his thumbs tracing patterns against her ribs. "The pack is counting on us." "They are." Neither of them moved. "If we don't survive this," Sarah said suddenly, "I want you to know, I'm glad it was you. I'm glad the goddess chose you for me." Cale's smile was fierce and tender at the same time. "We're going to survive this. Both of us. And then we're going to figure out what comes next. Promise me something. Anything. Don't try to be noble and self-sacrificing tonight. Don't throw your life away to save mine. We're partners now. We live or die together." "Partners," Cale repeated, as if testing the word. "I like the sound of that." They spent the rest of the day preparing, checking weapons, studying maps, coordinating with unit leaders. But through it all, Sarah was aware of the subtle shift in their dynamic. The careful politeness of the past few days had given way to something more natural, more intimate. They moved around each other with growing ease, anticipated each other's needs, communicated as much through the bond as through words. As evening approached and they prepared to face Thomas's forces, Sarah realized that somewhere in the midst of political necessity and supernatural bonds, something genuine was taking root between them. Whether it was love or just the promise of it, she couldn't say. But for the first time since her parents' death, she had something worth fighting for that wasn't just survival. She had hope, and she had Cale, standing beside her as they prepared to face the darkness ahead. Partners in truth, not just in name. The thought filled her with strength as they moved out into the night, ready to fight for the future they were just beginning to build together. Chapter 7. The forest was alive with the sounds of impending battle, the whisper of weapons being drawn, the soft pad of paws on forest floor, the barely audible growls of wolves preparing to fight for their lives. Sarah crouched beside Cale behind a fallen log, her silver daggers gleaming in the moonlight that filtered through the canopy above. "Remember," Cale murmured, his breath warm against her ear, "we stick to the plan. Hit hard, hit fast, and get out before they can regroup." Sarah nodded, though her heart was hammering against her ribs. Through the mate bond, she could feel Cale's controlled tension, his alpha instincts calculating odds and escape routes. But underneath that tactical mind, she sensed something deeper, a fierce protectiveness that made her skin tingle with awareness. "Damien's unit is in position," came the whispered report from Marcus, who had materialized beside them like a shadow. Her brother looked grimmer than she'd ever seen him, his usual easy smile replaced by the hard lines of a warrior preparing for war. "And the flanking force?" "Ready and waiting for our signal." Marcus met Sarah's eyes. "Last chance to change your mind about this, sister. Thomas won't hesitate to kill you, if he gets the chance." "He's going to try regardless," Sarah replied, checking the balance of her daggers one final time. "At least this way, I'm not waiting passively for the axe to fall." A howl echoed through the night, long, mournful, and unmistakably hostile. Thomas was announcing his presence, calling them out for the confrontation he'd orchestrated. "Arrogant bastard," Cale muttered, his eyes flashing gold in the darkness. "He thinks he's already won." "Maybe he has," said a new voice from behind them. They spun as one, weapons raised, but the figure stepping out of the shadows held his hands up in a gesture of peace. It was one of their own scouts, a young wolf named Peter, whose usual cocky confidence had been replaced by something that looked suspiciously like guilt. "Peter?" Sarah's blood turned to ice as understanding crashed over her. "You're the traitor." The young wolf's face crumpled. "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry, but he has my sister. Thomas took her 3 weeks ago, and he said he'd kill her if I didn't." Cale's hand shot out, clamping around Peter's throat with supernatural speed. "How much does he know?" "Everything," Peter gasped, tears streaming down his face. Troop movements, defensive positions, your battle plan. He knows you're here. The implications hit them like a physical blow. Their carefully laid strategy was worthless if Thomas knew every move they intended to make. Worse, they were now trapped in enemy territory with limited escape routes and a hostile force that outnumbered them 3-1. "We have to retreat," Marcus said immediately. "Fall back to the compound and—" His words were cut off by the whistle of arrows cutting through the night air. The ambush had begun. "Down!" Kale roared, tackling Sarah to the ground as silver-tipped shafts buried themselves in the log they'd been hiding behind. Around them, the night exploded into chaos as wolves from both sides shifted and charged. Sarah rolled to her feet, daggers in hand, just as a massive gray wolf launched itself at her from the underbrush. She dodged left and slashed upward, opening a red line across its flank. The wolf yelped and spun toward her, yellow eyes blazing with rage and pain. "Sarah?" Kale's warning came just as another attacker emerged from her blind spot, this one in human form, wielding a silver-edged sword that gleamed wickedly in the moonlight. She ducked under his swing and drove both daggers up toward his ribs, but he was faster than she'd expected. The blade caught her across the shoulder, sending fire racing through her arm. Through the bond, she felt Kale's answering roar of fury. The black wolf that was Kale's shifted form hit her attacker like a force of nature, jaws clamping down on the man's sword arm with bone-crushing force. The weapon dropped as the man screamed, and Kale's claws raked across his throat in a move that was both beautiful and terrible. But there were more coming, so many more. They poured out of the forest like shadows given form, overwhelming the Crimson Moon forces through sheer numbers. Sarah fought with desperate efficiency, her daggers finding their marks again and again, but for every enemy she dropped, 2 more seemed to take their place. "Fall back." Damien's voice cut through the battle noise. To the ravine. They retreated in fighting formation, Crimson Moon wolves covering each other as they gave ground to the relentless assault. Sarah found herself back-to-back with Marcus, both of them bleeding from multiple wounds, but still standing. "Just like old times," Marcus panted, driving his sword through an attacker's chest. "Except we're probably going to die this time," Sarah replied, spinning to slash at a wolf trying to flank them. Details. Despite everything, she almost smiled. Trust Marcus to find humor in their impending doom. They reached the ravine that marked the boundary of neutral territory, but instead of the safety they'd hoped for, they found Thomas Blackwood waiting with a fresh force of 20 wolves. He stood on the opposite ridge, his silver hair gleaming in the moonlight, his pale eyes fixed on Sarah with predatory satisfaction. "Surrender now," Thomas called across the water, "and I might let some of your mongrel friends live." Kale shifted back to human form, magnificent and deadly, even covered in blood and dirt. "Counteroffer," he said, his voice carrying clearly in the night air. "Face me in single combat. Winner takes all." "I don't negotiate with pack killers," Thomas replied. "But I'll make you a deal, nephew-in-law. Give me the traitor who stole my niece's honor, and I'll let you retreat with your surviving wolves." "She's not a traitor," Kale snarled. "She's my mate, chosen by the moon goddess herself." "The moon goddess makes mistakes sometimes. This abomination is proof of that." Sarah had heard enough. She stepped forward, her daggers still dripping with enemy blood, and raised her voice so it would carry to wolves on both sides of the ravine. "You want me, uncle? Come and take me." The challenge hung in the air like a thrown gauntlet. Around the ravine, wolves on both sides went still, recognizing the ancient ritual that had just been invoked. "Sarah, no," Kale said immediately. "You don't have to." "Yes, I do." She met his golden eyes, pouring all her determination through the mate bond. "This ends tonight, one way or another." Thomas's laugh was cold as winter wind. "You always were too bold for your own good, girl. Very well. Single combat it is." "No weapons," Sarah called out. "Shifted forms only. The old way." "Agreed." Both sides pulled back to give them room, forming a rough circle around the natural arena. Sarah began stripping off her clothes, handing her weapons to a grim-faced Marcus. "Are you insane?" Kale grabbed her arm, his grip gentle but desperate. "He's twice your size in wolf form, and he has decades more experience. He also has a bad left shoulder from an old injury. He favors his right side when he attacks, and he's too proud to retreat even when he should," Sarah replied calmly. "I know his weaknesses, Kale. I've been studying them my whole life. And if you're wrong?" Sarah reached up and cupped his face in her hands, memorizing the strong line of his jaw, the way his eyes reflected moonlight like liquid gold. "Then thank you for showing me what it felt like to be loved." Before he could respond, she kissed him fiercely, pouring everything she couldn't say into the contact. When they broke apart, both were breathing hard. "I love you too," Kale said roughly. "Which is why you can't do this." "Which is exactly why I have to." Sarah stepped back, already feeling the familiar tingle that preceded her shift. "Take care of Marcus if something happens to me." She didn't give him a chance to argue further. The change took her quickly, bones realigning, muscles stretching, her human concerns falling away as instinct and pack loyalty took over. Her wolf form was smaller than most, compact, and built for speed rather than raw power. Silver-gray fur with black markings along her legs and muzzle, green eyes that glowed with intelligence and determination. Across the arena, Thomas completed his own shift. He was massive even by alpha standards, his dark gray coat shot through with silver, his yellow eyes reflecting decades of cunning and cruelty. When he snarled, teeth the size of daggers gleamed in the moonlight. They began to circle each other, both looking for openings, testing reactions. Thomas moved like a predator confident in his superiority, heavy, deliberate, designed to intimidate. Sarah stayed light on her paws, constantly moving, making herself a difficult target. He struck first, lunging forward with jaws wide enough to crush her skull. But Sarah had been expecting it, the same opening move he'd used in every dominance challenge she'd ever witnessed. She rolled left and snapped at his exposed flank, her teeth finding purchase in the thick fur. Thomas roared and spun toward her, massive paws swinging in arcs that would have broken bones if they'd connected. But Sarah was already gone, dancing back out of range, blood on her muzzle. "First blood to me, uncle." The battle became a deadly dance after that, Thomas's raw power against Sarah's speed and agility. He had reach and strength on his side, but she had youth and desperation. Every time he thought he had her cornered, she slipped away like smoke, leaving new wounds in her wake. But the fight was taking its toll. Thomas might be older, but he had stamina that came from decades of survival. Sarah was beginning to tire, her movements a fraction slower, her breathing labored. Thomas sensed it too. His attacks became more confident, more aggressive. When Sarah stumbled slightly on a patch of loose stone, he was there instantly, massive jaws clamping down on her left hind leg. Pain exploded through her system as bones ground together under crushing pressure. Through the mate bond, she felt Kale's answering agony, his desperate need to intervene held in check only by the sacred nature of the challenge. Thomas began to shake his head, trying to break her leg entirely. Sarah twisted in his grip, using his momentum against him, and managed to sink her fangs into the soft tissue behind his ear. He released her with a howl of pain and rage, staggering backward. Sarah hit the ground hard, her left leg refusing to support her weight. Blood streamed from puncture wounds, and she could feel the fractures in the bone. "Get up," she commanded herself.
"Get up or die."
Thomas was already recovering, yellow eyes blazing with fury. Blood matted the fur around his ear, but the wound wasn't serious enough to slow him down. He began stalking toward her, confident now that victory was within his grasp. "Poor little Sarah," he said, his mental voice dripping with mock sympathy. "So brave, so foolish. Just like your parents." The mention of her parents sent rage blazing through her system, burning away pain and exhaustion. She forced herself to her feet, 3 legs supporting her weight, lips pulled back in a snarl of pure hatred. "Don't you dare speak of them." "They died begging," Thomas continued, circling her slowly. "Begging for their precious daughter's life. What do you think they'd say if they could see you now, made it to their killer? They'd say I chose love over hate, Sarah replied, her mental voice steady despite the pain. They'd be proud. They'd be ashamed. Thomas lunged again, going for her throat this time. But Sarah had been waiting for it, the killing blow that arrogance always demanded. At the last second, she dropped low and rolled under his leap, her fangs finding the vulnerable spot where his front leg joined his chest. Her teeth punched through fur and skin into the major artery beneath. Thomas's roar became a gurgle as blood filled his throat. He crashed to the ground, legs scrabbling weakly at the stone. Sarah maintained her grip until his struggles ceased, until the light faded from his yellow eyes, until the forest fell silent except for the sound of her own labored breathing. She'd won. But as the adrenaline faded, the full extent of her injuries became clear. Her leg was definitely broken, possibly in multiple places. Cuts and bites covered her body, and she was losing blood faster than her accelerated healing could compensate for. She managed to shift back to human form, but collapsed immediately, naked and bleeding on the cold stone. Through the mate bond, she felt Cale's panic as he rushed toward her. Sarah? He was beside her instantly, gathering her against his chest, his hands gentle as they assessed her injuries. Elena! Get Elena now. Did I win? She asked weakly, her vision starting to blur around the edges. You magnificent, terrifying, impossible woman, Cale said, his voice rough with emotion. You destroyed him completely. Good. Sarah tried to smile, but it came out more like a grimace. Is it over? The war. It's over, Cale promised, pressing his lips to her forehead. Thomas is dead, and there's no one left to challenge her claim as rightful Blackwood Alpha. The scattered packs will follow you now. Follow us, she corrected, her hand finding his. Partners, remember? Partners, he agreed, though she could feel his terror through the bond as Elena arrived and began working frantically to stabilize her injuries. Don't you dare die on me, Cale whispered fiercely. Not when I just found you. Not when we're just beginning. Sarah wanted to reassure him, but darkness was pulling at the edges of her consciousness. The last thing she felt before unconsciousness claimed her was the golden warmth of the mate bond, wrapping around her like a promise. She'd survived. They'd both survived. And tomorrow, they could begin building the future they'd fought so hard to claim. Chapter 8. Sarah drifted in and out of consciousness for 3 days, her broken body fighting to heal while her mate never left her side. Through the haze of pain medication and fever dreams, she was dimly aware of Cale's constant presence, his hand in hers, his voice reading to her, the steady pulse of the mate bond that anchored her to the world of the living. When she finally woke fully, late afternoon sunlight was streaming through the windows of what she recognized as the pack's medical wing. Her left leg was immobilized in a complex brace, and she could feel the tight pull of stitches across her ribs and shoulders. Welcome back, Elena said softly from the chair beside her bed. The healer looked exhausted, her usual bright smile replaced by relief tinged with worry. You gave us quite a scare. How long? Sarah's voice came out as a hoarse croak. 3 days. Your body needed time to process the trauma. Elena moved to check her pulse, her touch gentle but professional. The good news is your leg will heal completely, though you'll need to stay off it for at least another week. The bad news is you're going to be in significant pain for a while. Where's Cale? Dealing with the aftermath of Thomas's death. There are scattered Blackwood wolves arriving hourly, all wanting to pledge loyalty to their new alpha. Elena's expression grew serious. That would be you, by the way. Congratulations on becoming the leader of 2 packs while barely conscious. Sarah tried to sit up, but immediately regretted it as pain shot through her torso. I need to. You need to rest, Elena said firmly. Cale has everything under control. He's been coordinating with Marcus to manage the integration, and honestly, he's handling it better than anyone expected. He shouldn't have to handle it alone. He's not alone. He has Marcus, Damien, and the rest of the council. And more importantly, he has the knowledge that his mate is going to survive. Elena pulled a chair closer to the bed. Sarah, I've never seen an alpha more devastated than Kale was when we brought you in. If you died. The unfinished sentence hung in the air between them. Through the mate bond, even at a distance, Sarah could feel the echo of Kale's emotions, relief, exhaustion, and an underlying current of possessive need that made her skin warm despite her injuries. I want to see him, she said. He'll be back soon. He only left an hour ago, and only because Marcus physically dragged him away for a shower and food. Elena smiled. The man hasn't left your side since we brought you in. I had to threaten to sedate him to get him to sleep. As if summoned by their conversation, the door opened and Kale stepped inside. He looked haggard, his usual perfect composure replaced by obvious strain, but his eyes blazed with relief when he saw her sitting up. You're awake, he said, crossing to her bed in 3 quick strides. How do you feel? Like I was trampled by a very large, very angry wolf, Sarah replied, but she was smiling. But alive. Alive, Kale repeated, as if testing the word. He sat carefully on the edge of her bed, his hand finding hers with the desperate precision of a man who'd thought he'd lost everything. When you collapsed after the fight, when Elena couldn't stop the bleeding. But she did stop it. I'm here, and I'm going to be fine. You're never doing anything that reckless again, Kale said fiercely. I don't care if the entire world is ending. You don't get to risk your life like that. Despite her pain, Sarah felt her temper flare. Excuse me? I seem to remember saving both our packs with that reckless behavior. You nearly died, but I didn't. And now the war is over, Thomas is gone, and we can actually build something together instead of just surviving. Sarah struggled to sit up straighter, ignoring Elena's worried frown. You don't get to put me in a cage just because you were scared. Scared? Kale's laugh was harsh. Scared doesn't begin to cover what I felt watching you fight for your life, while I could do nothing but stand there. Terrified, helpless, completely out of my mind. Those are closer. The raw honesty in his voice deflated her anger. Through the bond, she felt the depth of his trauma, the way watching her nearly die had shaken him to his core. I'm sorry, she said softly. I know it was hard for you to watch. But Kale, I'm not fragile. I'm not going to break if you're not constantly protecting me. You just spent 3 days unconscious with internal bleeding and a shattered leg. And I'm healing. We heal, remember? It's what we do. Sarah squeezed his hand. I need you to trust that I can take care of myself. That we can take care of each other. Elena cleared her throat diplomatically. I should check on the other patients. Sarah, you need rest, but you can have visitors for short periods. Don't overdo it. After the healer left, Kale moved his chair closer to the bed, still holding Sarah's hand like a lifeline. Tell me what's been happening, Sarah said. Elena mentioned Blackwood wolves arriving? Dozens of them, with more every hour. Word spread quickly about Thomas's death and your victory. They're coming to pledge loyalty to the rightful Blackwood Alpha. Kale's expression grew troubled. The problem is figuring out how to integrate 2 packs that have been at war for over a century. Any major conflicts? A few skirmishes, some posturing from wolves on both sides who aren't ready to let go of old grudges. But Marcus has been instrumental in smoothing things over. He's got a gift for diplomacy that I never expected. Sarah smiled. He always was the charmer in our family. What about resources? Territory? We can't exactly squeeze 2 packs into your compound.
We're working on that.
There are several abandoned settlements in neutral territory that could be rebuilt. The idea is to create satellite communities connected to the main pack, with free movement between them. Ambitious. And expensive. Worth it if it means lasting peace. Kale brought her hand to his lips, pressing a soft kiss to her knuckles. Besides, we'll have access to Blackwood trade routes and hunting grounds now. The combined resources should more than offset the initial costs. They talked for another hour about pack integration, resource allocation, and the dozens of practical decisions required to merge 2 formerly hostile groups. But underneath the logistics, Sarah was increasingly aware of something else, a growing heat that had nothing to do with healing or fever. The mate bond was strengthening as her body recovered, carrying not just emotions but physical sensations. Every time Kale touched her hand, every time his scent filled her lungs, warmth pooled low in her belly. And from the way his breathing had gradually become more controlled, she suspected he was feeling the same pull. "Sarah," Kale said suddenly, his voice rough. "There's something else we need to discuss." "What?" "The claiming. The physical bond." He looked uncomfortable, almost shy, which was endearing on a man who commanded the loyalty of hundreds. "With everything that's happened, we haven't consummated the mating," Sarah finished, amused by his awkwardness. "It's okay to say the words, Kale."
Right.
"That." He cleared his throat. "The thing is, your near-death experience has triggered something in the bond. My wolf is becoming insistent about completing the claiming. The need to mark you, to make sure you're truly mine, it's getting harder to control." Sarah felt her cheeks warm as heat spiraled through her body. She'd been feeling the same pull, the growing need for deeper connection, but she'd assumed it was just her own confused emotions. "How insistent?" she asked. Kale's eyes darkened. "Insistent enough that I've been sleeping in the guest quarters because I don't trust myself to share a bed with you right now. The scent of your injuries, your vulnerability, it triggers every protective instinct I have. But underneath that is this desperate need to claim you, to bond with you so completely that nothing can ever threaten what we have again." The honesty of it sent desire racing through her system. Despite her injuries, despite the fact that she could barely sit up without assistance, she wanted him with an intensity that was almost frightening. "What if I said I wanted that too?" Kale went very still. "Sarah, you're injured. You need to heal before we even think about—" "I'm not talking about right this second," she interrupted. "But soon, when Elena clears me for activity." "You're sure? It's not just the bond talking?" "Probably partly the bond," Sarah admitted. "But also just me. Wanting you. Wanting to be completely yours in every way that matters." Kale's control visibly frayed at her words. The scent of his arousal filled the small room, making her own body respond despite her injuries. "How soon do you think Elena will?" "Soon," came Elena's amused voice from the doorway. "But not if you two don't stop flooding my medical wing with pheromones. Some of us are trying to work." Both Sarah and Kale flushed red as Elena entered the room, clearly trying not to smile. "Sorry," Sarah mumbled. "Don't be sorry, just be patient. Another few days of healing, and you should be cleared for light activity." Elena's grin became wicked. "Though I'd recommend starting slow. Broken bones and athletic pursuits don't always mix well." "Elena!" Sarah protested. "What?" "I'm a healer. It's my job to make sure you don't re-injure yourself during your claiming." Elena checked her chart professionally. "Besides, the sooner you two complete the bond, the better. The unclaimed mating is making both packs nervous." "Nervous how?" Kale asked, his alpha instincts immediately alert. "Nothing dramatic, just the usual concerns. Some wolves are worried that the bond isn't fully stable without the physical claiming. Others think it's a sign of weakness or uncertainty." Elena shrugged. "Complete the bond, and those concerns disappear." After Elena left again, Sarah and Kale sat in comfortable silence, both lost in thought about the near future and what it would mean for them. "Are you nervous?" Sarah asked finally. "Terrified," Kale admitted. "Not about the physical aspect, but about everything else. What if I hurt you? What if the claiming doesn't work the way it's supposed to? What if—" "Hey." Sarah reached out and touched his cheek, forcing him to meet her eyes. "We'll figure it out together, remember? That's what partners do." Kale leaned into her touch, his eyes closing as if her hand was an anchor in a storm. "I love you," he said quietly. "I know I said it before, in the heat of battle, but I want you to know, it's not just the bond talking. What I feel for you is real." "I know," Sarah said, her heart full to bursting. "Because I feel the same way. Love, not just bond magic. Choice, not just fate." When he kissed her, it was soft and careful, mindful of her injuries, but carrying the promise of deeper passion to come. The mate bond hummed between them, carrying anticipation and desire and the absolute certainty that they were meant to be together. "Soon," Sarah whispered against his lips. "Soon," Kale agreed. "And then nothing will ever come between us again." Outside, the sun was setting over mountains that no longer marked the boundary between enemy territories. The war was over. The packs were uniting, and in a few days, she and Kale would complete the bond that would seal their fates together forever. Sarah had never been more terrified or more excited about anything in her life. But as Kale's thumb traced gentle circles on her wrist and the mate bond carried his love like a warm current through her veins, she knew with absolute certainty that she was exactly where she belonged.
Chapter 9.
Elena declared Sarah fit for light activity on a crisp morning exactly 1 week after the battle with Thomas. The healer's knowing smile and pointed suggestions about taking things slow had left both Sarah and Kale flushed with embarrassment and anticipation in equal measure. Remember, Elena had said with barely contained amusement, broken bones need time to fully heal. So no acrobatics for at least another week. Now, as evening approached, Sarah found herself pacing Kale's chambers like a caged wolf, her newly healed legs strong beneath her weight. The mate bond hummed with nervous energy from both sides, carrying Kale's careful control and her own mixture of desire and apprehension. "You're going to wear a groove in the floor," Kale observed from his position by the fireplace. He was attempting to appear casual, but the rigid line of his shoulders and the way his hands gripped his whiskey glass betrayed his own tension. "Sorry," Sarah said, forcing herself to stop moving. This is terrifying? Overwhelming? Completely unprecedented in both our lives." "All of the above." Sarah managed to laugh. "I feel ridiculous. I've faced down enemies in battle, led warriors into combat, killed my own uncle in single combat. But the thought of this has me more nervous than anything I've ever done." Kale set down his glass and crossed to her, his movements fluid and predatory. "We don't have to do anything you're not ready for," he said softly. "The bond will wait. I will wait. That's not the problem." Sarah looked up at him, taking in the strong line of his jaw, the way firelight played across his dark hair, the golden eyes that seemed to see straight through to her soul. "The problem is that I want you, so much it scares me. I've never felt anything this intense." "Neither have I," Kale admitted, reaching up to cup her face in his hands. "What we have, it's not just the mate bond anymore. That brought us together, but what's grown between us, that's all us." "How do you know?" "Because when I look at you, I don't just see my destined mate. I see the woman who fought beside me, who protected my pack, who faced down impossible odds to save the people she cared about. I see your strength, your courage, your infuriating stubborn streak that makes me want to kiss you senseless and shake you at the same time." Sarah felt heat pool low in her belly at the hunger in his voice. "And what do you see when you look at me now?" Kale's eyes darkened. "I see the woman I love. The woman I want to claim so completely that there's never any doubt about who she belongs to." "I belong to myself," Sarah said automatically, but there was no heat in the protest. "Yes," Kale agreed. "But you also belong with me, just like I belong with you. That's what this is, isn't it? Not ownership, but belonging." The distinction sent warmth spiraling through her chest. This wasn't about dominance or control. It was about choice, about two people deciding to bind their lives together completely. "Show me," she whispered, rising up on her toes to press her lips to his. The kiss exploded between them like wildfire. All the careful control they'd maintained over the past week shattered in an instant, replaced by desperate need and fierce possession. Kale's arms came around her, pulling her against his chest as his mouth moved over hers with increasing hunger. Through the mate bond, sensation doubled and tripled. She felt his desire as if it were her own, felt the way her scent made his wolf howl with need, felt the tight rein he was keeping on his control even as passion threatened to consume them both. "Sarah," he groaned against her lips. "If we don't slow down." "Don't you dare slow down," she said fiercely, her hands already working at the buttons of his shirt. "I've been thinking about this for days. I need you, Kale. All of you." His shirt hit the floor, followed quickly by her sweater. When skin met skin for the first time, both of them gasped at the intensity of the contact. The mate bond sang between them, carrying pleasure so acute it was almost painful. "Your leg," Kale said, his voice strained as he lifted her carefully. "Elena said to be careful with your leg." "Elena said no acrobatics," Sarah corrected, wrapping her arms around his neck. "I think we can manage to be creative within those parameters." Kale's laugh was rough with desire as he carried her to the massive bed. He set her down gently, his hands immediately moving to the fastenings of her jeans. "Are you sure?" he asked one last time, his golden eyes searching her face. "Once we do this, once I mark you, there's no going back. The bond will be permanent, unbreakable." "I know," Sarah said, reaching up to trace the line of his cheekbone. "I want permanent. I want unbreakable. I want you." What followed was unlike anything either of them had ever experienced. The mate bond amplified every sensation, every touch, until they could barely tell where one ended and the other began. Kale's hands and mouth mapped every inch of her skin with reverent thoroughness, and she returned the favor, discovering the places that made him groan her name like a prayer. When he finally moved over her, they were both trembling with need. The first moment of joining sent shockwaves through the bond, pleasure so intense that Sarah saw stars behind her closed eyelids. Kale went very still, his forehead pressed against hers, his breathing harsh. "Okay," he asked roughly. "More than okay," she gasped. "Perfect. You're perfect." They moved together with increasing passion, finding a rhythm that felt as old as time itself. The bond carried every sensation back and forth between them, creating a feedback loop of pleasure that built and built until Sarah thought she might die from the intensity of it. When Kale's teeth found the junction of her neck and shoulder, she knew what was coming. The claiming bite, the mark that would brand her as his mate for all the world to see. "Do it," she whispered, tilting her head to give him better access. "Mark me. Make me yours." His fangs pierced her skin in the same moment that her climax crashed over her. The dual sensation of pleasure and possession sent her spiraling into an orgasm so intense that she lost all sense of time and space. Through the bond, she felt Kale's answering release, felt the moment when the claiming mark took hold and sealed their bond permanently. When awareness returned, she was sprawled across Kale's chest, both of them breathing hard and covered in a light sheen of sweat. The claiming mark on her neck throbbed with a pleasant heat, and through the bond, she could feel the deep satisfaction of Kale's wolf at finally having marked his mate. "How do you feel?" Kale asked softly, his hand stroking through her hair. "Different," Sarah said honestly. "Complete, in a way I didn't know I was incomplete. The bond feels stronger. More real. It is stronger. The physical claiming creates a connection that goes beyond the emotional bond. We'll be able to sense each other across great distances, share strength in times of need, even communicate without words if necessary." That sounds overwhelming. It can be, at first, but you'll get used to it. Kale's arms tightened around her. "We're truly mated now. In the eyes of the pack, the moon goddess, and every supernatural law that exists, you are mine, and I am yours." "Good," Sarah said firmly, pressing a kiss to the center of his chest. "Because I'm not giving you up. Not ever. Even if I become overprotective and overbearing? Especially then. Someone has to keep you in line." Kale's laugh rumbled through his chest. "I love you, Sarah Thornwick." "I love you too, Kale Thornwick." She lifted her head to meet his eyes. "What happens now?" "Now we figure out how to run two packs as equal partners. We deal with whatever challenges come our way. We build the life we both want." His smile was soft and full of promise. "And we do it all together." "Together," Sarah agreed, settling back against his chest. Through the mate bond, she could feel his contentment, his deep satisfaction at having his mate safe and claimed and exactly where she belonged. Outside, a wolf howled in the distance, not a threat or a challenge, but a song of joy and celebration. The pack could sense that their alpha's bond was finally complete, and they were rejoicing in the strength and stability it represented. "They know," Kale said unnecessarily. "Let them know," Sarah replied. "Let everyone know. I'm not ashamed of what we have." "What we have," Kale said, pressing his lips to the claiming mark on her neck, "is a miracle. The moon goddess paired two enemies and turned them into something stronger than either could have been alone." "Partners in truth," Sarah said, echoing the words that had become their promise to each other. "Partners in everything," Kale agreed. As they lay tangled together in the aftermath of their claiming, Sarah felt a peace she had never known before. The war was over, the packs were uniting, and she had found not just a mate but a true partner in the man who held her heart. The future stretched ahead of them, full of challenges and possibilities in equal measure. But whatever came next, they would face it together, bound by moonlight, sealed by choice, and united by a love that had grown from the ashes of old hatred into something beautiful and unbreakable. The claiming was complete, but their story was just beginning. Chapter 10. 3 weeks after the claiming, Sarah stood before the largest gathering of wolves in living memory. The Great Clearing, a natural amphitheater nestled between 3 mountain peaks, had been chosen as neutral ground for the formal unification ceremony. Nearly 400 wolves filled the space, Crimson Moon Pack members mixing freely with the scattered survivors of the Blackwood territories, all united under the leadership of their alpha pair. The claiming mark on Sarah's neck tingled as she felt Kale's steady presence through their bond. He stood beside her on the raised stone platform, magnificent in ceremonial leathers that emphasized his powerful build and alpha status. But it was the way he looked at her, with love, respect, and unwavering partnership, that made her heart race. "Nervous?" he murmured through their private bond, the mental connection that had grown stronger every day since their claiming. "Excited," she replied the same way, letting him feel her anticipation through their link. "This is what we fought for. What we dreamed of." Below them, the crowd fell silent as Elder Morrison, the most senior wolf in either pack, stepped forward to begin the ceremony. At nearly 90 years old, he was one of the few wolves who remembered a time before the war, when the packs had been allies rather than enemies. "We gather here under the full moon," Morrison's voice carried clearly across the clearing, "to witness something that was prophesied but never believed possible. The union of two packs that have shed each other's blood for over a century, brought together by the wisdom of the moon goddess and the courage of two souls who chose love over hatred." A murmur of agreement rippled through the crowd. Sarah spotted familiar faces, Elena beaming with pride, Damien looking cautiously optimistic, Marcus grinning like the proud brother he was. But there were also faces that remained skeptical, wolves from both packs who were still adjusting to the reality of their former enemies becoming family. "Alpha Kale Thornwick," Morrison continued, "step forward and speak your commitment to this union." Kale moved to the center of the platform, his presence commanding immediate attention. When he spoke, his voice carried the authority of a born leader, but also the warmth of a man who genuinely cared for his people. "I stand before you not just as the alpha of the Crimson Moon Pack, but as a wolf who has learned that strength comes not from standing alone, but from standing together." His golden eyes swept across the assembled crowd. "For too long, we have defined ourselves by who we fought against. Today, we choose to define ourselves by who we fight for." Applause echoed across the clearing, and through the bond, Sarah felt Kale's satisfaction at the positive response. But she also sensed his underlying tension, the weight of responsibility for hundreds of lives, the knowledge that any mistake could fracture this fragile unity they'd worked so hard to build. "Alpha Sarah Thornwick," Morrison called, and Sarah stepped forward to take her place beside Kale. The formal recognition of her new name still sent a thrill through her, a reminder of how completely her life had changed. "I stand before you as someone who has lost everything to this war," she began, her voice strong and clear. "My parents, my home, most of my pack, all sacrificed to a hatred that served no one except those who profited from our pain." Her gaze found Thomas's former lieutenant, a wolf named Carson who had reluctantly sworn loyalty after his alpha's death. But I also stand before you as someone who has gained everything through love. A mate, a family, a future where our children will never know the fear and loss that defined our generation. The crowd's response was warmer this time, and Sarah felt some of the lingering skepticism begin to fade. These wolves, her wolves now, were tired of war. They wanted the peace and prosperity she and Kale were offering, even if it meant overcoming generations of conditioning. The ceremony of unification requires a demonstration of trust, Morrison announced. Alpha Sarah, as the leader of the smaller pack, do you willingly place your wolves under the protection and authority of the Crimson Moon Pack? This was the moment that had caused the most debate in the weeks of preparation. Many of the remaining Blackwood wolves had struggled with the idea of formally submitting to their former enemies, even with Sarah as their advocate. I do, Sarah said clearly, but not as subjects to rulers. As equals joining a family. Alpha Kale, do you accept responsibility for the welfare and protection of all wolves who choose to join your pack, regardless of their former allegiances? I do, Kale replied without hesitation. And I pledge that no wolf will be judged by the mistakes of the past, only by their actions in the future we build together. Morrison nodded solemnly. Then let the marks of unity be shared. This was the most sacred part of the ceremony, and one that would bind the packs together in ways that went beyond political alliance. Sarah and Kale moved to face each other, both drawing ceremonial daggers that gleamed silver in the moonlight. They pressed the blades to their palms simultaneously, letting blood well up from the shallow cuts. Then, clasping hands so their blood mingled, they spoke the ancient words that would seal their pack's fate together. By blood and bond, by moon and star, we unite what was divided, they said in unison. Let our strength be shared, our burdens lightened, our future written as one people. The moment their blood touched, power rippled through the clearing like a shockwave. Every wolf present felt it. The sudden awareness of new pack bonds forming, the expansion of loyalty and protection to include former enemies, the settling sensation of a larger, stronger community taking shape around them. Through her mate bond with Kale, Sarah felt his wonder at the magnitude of what they'd just accomplished. Nearly 400 wolves, all connected now by the same pack bonds that would make them family, in the truest sense. It is done, Morrison declared, his ancient voice thick with emotion. The Thornwick pack is born from the ashes of old hatred, blessed by the moon goddess, and sealed by the love of two alphas who chose unity over division. The cheer that erupted from the crowd was deafening, full of joy and relief and hope for the future. Wolves shifted and howled their celebration to the moon, the sound echoing off the mountain peaks like a promise that better days were coming. As the formal ceremony concluded and the celebration began, Sarah found herself swept into a whirlwind of congratulations, questions about pack integration, and heartfelt thanks from wolves who had never dared to hope for peace in their lifetimes. You did it, Elena said, appearing at Sarah's elbow with tears streaming down her face. You actually did it. My grandmother used to tell stories about a time when all the mountain packs were allies. I never thought I'd live to see it happen again. We all did it, Sarah corrected, squeezing the healer's hand. Every wolf who chose to put trust over suspicion, hope over hatred, they made this possible. Don't be so modest, Damien said, joining their group with an expression of grudging admiration. 3 months ago, I wanted to kill you myself. Now I can't imagine this pack without you. High praise from someone who tried to talk me out of accepting the mate bond, Sarah replied with a grin. I was protecting my alpha. Now, I realize you're the one protecting all of us. Damien's expression grew serious. The intelligence reports we've been receiving from the outlying territories, there are rogues moving in larger groups than we've seen before. Some of the other packs are worried about our expansion, afraid we're getting too powerful. Threats already? Kale appeared beside them, slipping his arm around Sarah's waist with casual possessiveness. Can't we have one night of celebration before dealing with the next crisis? Actually, Marcus said, approaching their group with a tablet in his hands, the threats might be turning into opportunities. I've been fielding messages from pack leaders all evening. Apparently, Our unification ceremony was witnessed by scouts from at least 6 other territories. And, Sarah prompted, and 3 of them want to discuss alliance treaties. Formal ones, not just the usual non-aggression pacts. Marcus's grin was infectious. Word is spreading that the Thornwick Pact doesn't just talk about peace, we actually achieve it. Through the mate bond, Sarah felt Cale's surge of pride and ambition. The idea of their pack serving as a model for others, helping to bring stability to the entire region, appealed to his alpha instincts in the best possible way. One step at a time, Sarah cautioned, though she was equally excited by the possibilities. We need to make sure our own integration is solid before we start taking on the role of regional peacekeepers. Agreed. But still, Cale's smile was sharp with anticipation. Imagine what we could accomplish if half the mountain packs were allied instead of constantly skirmishing with each other. Imagine what our children will grow up in, Sarah added softly. A world where pack wars are ancient history, where alliances are built on mutual respect instead of fear. Children? Elena perked up immediately, her healer instincts sensing an opportunity. Are you? Not yet, Sarah said quickly, feeling her cheeks warm. But someday. When things are more settled, we'll find new challenges to face, Cale said with a laugh. That's what alphas do, but at least we'll face them together. As the night wore on and the celebration continued around them, Sarah felt a deep sense of completion that had nothing to do with the mate bond. Standing beside Cale while their united pack celebrated around them, planning for a future built on hope instead of fear, this was what she'd been fighting for without even knowing it. The war that had defined her entire life was truly over. Not just ended, but transformed into something beautiful. The enemies who had killed her parents were now family, protected by the same bonds that connected her to Cale. The hatred that had driven her for so long had been replaced by love strong enough to move mountains. No regrets. Cale asked softly, echoing the question he'd asked on their first morning together. Only that it took us so long to get here, Sarah replied, turning in his arms to face him fully. Around them, their pack, their family, continued their celebrations under the watchful light of the full moon. We got here when we were supposed to, Cale said, pressing a soft kiss to her temple. The goddess doesn't make mistakes. No, Sarah agreed, looking out at the sea of happy faces, at wolves from both sides of the old divide laughing and talking together like the family they'd always been meant to be. She really doesn't. The Thornwick Pack was born that night under the full moon, blessed by love and sealed by hope. And as their celebration echoed across the mountains, every wolf who heard it knew that something fundamental had changed in their world. The age of pack wars was ending. The age of unity had begun. And it had all started with 2 enemies who chose to love instead of hate. Chapter 11. 6 months after the unification ceremony, Sarah was beginning to understand why her parents had looked so tired all the time. Running one pack was challenging enough. Managing the merged Thornwick Pack, with its complex web of former rivalries, resource allocation disputes, and territorial negotiations, was exhausting. She rubbed her temples as she stared at the reports spread across the desk in their shared office, a converted tower room that had become the nerve center of their expanding operation. Through the mate bond, she felt Cale's similar fatigue as he dealt with a trade dispute between 2 satellite settlements. The Northridge wolves are refusing to share hunting grounds with the Blackwood refugees, she said without looking up from her papers. Apparently, there was an incident involving someone's sister and someone else's mate about 15 years ago. Let me guess, they want us to relocate either the entire Northridge group or all 37 Blackwood families? Cale's voice carried the weariness of someone who had dealt with similar disputes all week. Both. They've generously offered to solve the problem by having all the outsiders moved to different territories entirely. Sarah finally looked up, noting the tight lines around Cale's golden eyes. How's your trade dispute going? The Iron Ridge settlement wants to charge the Pine Valley Group tariffs for crossing their territory to reach the main market. Pine Valley is threatening to secede from the pack entirely if we don't force Iron Ridge to honor the free passage agreements. Of course they are. Sarah leaned back in her chair, watching her mate pace the length of the room like the caged predator he sometimes resembled. Sometimes I think Thomas was right about one thing: peace is a lot more complicated than war. Don't even joke about that, Kale said sharply, stopping mid-pace to look at her with alarm. I'm not joking, I'm just tired. Frustrated. When we were planning this unification, I thought the hard part would be getting people to stop trying to kill each other. I didn't realize that living together peacefully would require settling disputes about fishing rights and grazing boundaries every single day. Kale moved to the window, looking out over the compound that had grown exponentially since their mating. New buildings dotted the landscape, housing the expanded administrative staff needed to manage their territory. Training grounds bustled with activity as mixed patrols of former enemies learned to work together. Gardens and workshops showed the peaceful industry of a thriving community. It's working, though, he said quietly. Look at them, Sarah. 6 months ago, half those wolves would have killed the other half on sight. Now they're arguing about fishing rights instead of spilling blood. I know it's working. I can see it every day. But sometimes I wonder if we bit off more than we can chew. Sarah joined him at the window, automatically leaning into his warmth when his arm came around her waist. 3 more packs have sent envoys asking about alliance treaties. The Council of Alphas wants us to attend their next summit to discuss regional stability. And according to Marcus's intelligence reports, there are at least 2 different rogue factions planning raids on our outer settlements. Sounds like we're making enemies as fast as we're making allies. Faster, probably. Success breeds resentment, especially among alphas who've built their power on maintaining the status quo of constant conflict. Through the mate bond, Sarah felt Kale's spike of protective anger. The thought of anyone threatening their people, their hard-won peace, triggered every alpha instinct he possessed. A sharp knock interrupted their brooding. Come in, Sarah called, and Damien entered carrying a leather portfolio that immediately made both alphas tense. Documents in sealed folders usually meant serious trouble. We have a problem, Damien said without preamble. A big one. How big? Kale asked, already moving toward the desk. Remember those rogue factions Marcus has been tracking? They're not just random troublemakers anymore. They've organized under a single leader, someone calling himself the Shadow Alpha. And according to our latest intelligence, they're not just planning raids on our settlements. Damien opened the portfolio and spread several photographs across the desk. Sarah felt her blood turn to ice as she recognized the images: detailed surveillance photos of the compound, the satellite settlements, even shots of her and Kale during public appearances. They've been watching us, she said quietly. For months. Gets worse, Damien continued grimly. We managed to capture one of their scouts yesterday. Under interrogation, he revealed that the Shadow Alpha isn't interested in territory or resources. He wants to make an example of us, to prove that pack unification is impossible by completely destroying what we've built here. Kale's hands clenched into fists. How many wolves is he commanding? At least 300, possibly more. They're recruiting from failed packs, outcasts, rogues who've been displaced by territorial wars. He's promising them a return to the old ways, might makes right, survival of the strongest, no alliances or treaties to constrain them. A warlord, Sarah said, recognizing the type from her father's stories about the chaos before the great packs formed. Someone who thrives on conflict and sees peace as weakness. The timing isn't coincidental, Kale added, his tactical mind already working through the implications. He's waited until we're fully committed to integration, until we have hundreds of non-combatants depending on our protection. Maximum vulnerability, maximum potential for casualties. There's more, Damien said reluctantly. The captured scout claims the Shadow Alpha has inside information about our defenses, patrol schedules, even the locations of our safe houses. Either he has supernatural intelligence gathering abilities, or we have another traitor, Sarah finished, her heart sinking. The betrayal by Peter had been painful enough, but the thought of going through that again, of discovering that someone they trusted was selling out their people, made her stomach churn. I've already initiated security protocols, Damien continued. Limited information sharing, rotated schedules, increased counter-surveillance measures. But if there is a mole, they've had months to gather intelligence. Sarah sank into her chair, suddenly feeling every one of the sleepless nights she'd endured over the past 6 months. Recommendations. We need to go on the offensive, Kale said immediately. Find the Shadow Alpha before he can launch his attack. Eliminate the threat permanently. With what forces? Sarah countered. Half our warriors are scattered across the settlements, and the other half are still learning to work together effectively. We pull everyone back to mount an offensive, and we leave our people defenseless. So, we just wait for him to attack? We prepare.
We fortify.
We make sure that when he comes, we're ready for him. Sarah looked at Damien. What's our timeline? Unknown. The scout died before we could extract more specific information. Poison tooth. Activated when he realized he'd been captured. Professional grade, which suggests the Shadow Alpha has resources beyond just a collection of rogues. Backing. Kale asked immediately. Has to be. Someone with serious money and connections is funding this operation. The question is who and why. Through the mate bond, Sarah felt the same suspicion that was growing in her own mind. The Council of Alphas, she said quietly. They've been pressuring us to attend their summit for months. What if this isn't about proving pack unification is impossible? What if it's about eliminating us before we can change the entire power structure of the region? Kale's expression grew grim. A preemptive strike. Destroy the threat to the established order before it can spread. It makes sense, Damien agreed reluctantly. Several of the council members have built their power on maintaining territorial conflicts. If we succeed in creating lasting peace, their entire model of leadership becomes obsolete. So we're not just fighting rogues and outcasts, Sarah said, pieces clicking into place in her mind. We're fighting the established power structure itself. Good, Kale said, his smile sharp and dangerous. I was starting to worry our enemies weren't taking us seriously enough. Despite everything, Sarah felt a laugh bubble up in her chest. Only you would be pleased to discover we're facing a conspiracy of alpha warlords backed by unlimited resources. They obviously don't know us very well if they think threats are going to make us back down, Kale replied. We didn't build this pack by being cautious. No, but we might preserve it by being smart. Sarah turned to Damien. I want security tripled around the satellite settlements. Start rotating our patrol leaders so no one person has complete information about our defensive positions. And send messages to Marcus and Elena. I want them here for a full strategy session. What about the council's summit invitation? Damien asked. Sarah and Kale exchanged a look, communicating silently through their bond. If they attended the summit, they'd be walking into potential enemy territory with minimal backup. But if they refused, it would signal weakness and fear, qualities that would encourage their enemies and worry their allies. We go, Kale said finally. But we go prepared for war. The summit is in 2 weeks, Damien noted. That doesn't give us much time to prepare for both a potential attack here and a diplomatic mission that might turn hostile. Then we better get started, Sarah said, rising from her chair with renewed determination. The exhaustion of earlier was gone, burned away by the clarity of purpose that came with a clear threat to face. Damien, I want a full security briefing in 1 hour. Include Marcus, Elena, and the settlement leaders via secure communication. And I want intelligence reports on every alpha who'll be at that summit, Kale added. Allies, enemies, and everyone in between. If we're walking into a trap, I want to know exactly who's setting it. After Damien left to carry out their orders, Sarah and Kale stood together at the window, looking out over the pack they'd built with so much hope and effort. Regrets? Kale asked softly, echoing their old question. About the unification? Never. Sarah leaned against his side, drawing strength from his solid presence. About painting targets on our backs by succeeding too well? Ask me again when this is over. We'll get through this, Kale said with quiet certainty. Whatever they throw at us, we'll handle it. Together. Together, Sarah agreed. But as she watched their people going about their daily lives, unaware of the shadow gathering around them, She couldn't shake the feeling that they were about to face the greatest challenge of their leadership. The question wasn't whether they would survive. She had absolute faith in their combined strength. The question was whether the dream they'd built, the peace they'd fought so hard to achieve, would survive with them. Through the mate bond, she felt Kale's matching determination and knew that whatever came next, they would face it as they had faced everything else, as true partners, united by love and strengthened by the bonds that made them more than the sum of their individual parts. The Shadow Alpha and his backers were about to learn what happened when they threatened the Thornwick Pack. And Sarah suspected they weren't going to like the lesson. Chapter 12. The Council Summit had been a trap, just as they'd suspected. But what the traditional alphas hadn't counted on was Sarah and Kale's willingness to turn diplomatic proceedings into a supernatural courtroom, complete with evidence of the conspiracy against them and testimony from captured Shadow Alpha operatives. The revelation that 3 council members had been funding rogue attacks to prevent pack unification had shattered the old power structure completely. Some alphas had chosen exile rather than face justice. Others had embraced the new model of cooperative leadership that the Thornwick Pack represented. Now, as Sarah stood on the balcony of their expanded compound, watching the sun set over the mountains that had once marked enemy territory, she marveled at how completely their world had transformed. The Riverside Pack accepted our alliance proposal, Kale said, appearing behind her with 2 glasses of wine and the satisfied expression of someone who just closed a particularly satisfying negotiation. That makes 12 formal allies and 6 associated territories. Sarah hummed, accepting her glass but not turning away from the view. And the Shadow Alpha? Still missing, but his network is completely dismantled. Marcus thinks he's probably fled to the coastal territories, trying to rebuild with whatever rogues he can recruit. Kale moved to stand beside her, his free hand settling on the growing curve of her belly. He's no longer our problem. Sarah leaned into her mate's touch, marveling as she always did at how perfectly they fit together. The baby inside her responded to Kale's presence, shifting restlessly as if already recognizing their father's voice. Active tonight, Kale observed, his palms spreading wide across her stomach. Takes after their father, Sarah replied dryly. Restless, demanding, and absolutely convinced they know what's best for everyone. Or they take after their mother, brave, stubborn, and completely fearless in the face of impossible odds. I prefer your version. They stood in comfortable silence, watching their territory settle into evening routines. In the distance, she could see children playing in the communal gardens while their parents prepared dinner. Former Blackwood and Crimson Moon wolves worked side by side, their old enmities forgotten in the face of shared prosperity and safety. Any word from the healers about when? Kale's question trailed off, but Sarah felt his anticipation through the bond. Elena thinks another month, maybe 6 weeks. First babies always take their time, according to her. Sarah placed her hand over his, interlacing their fingers. Are you ready to be a father? Are you ready to be a mother? I asked you first. Kale's laugh was warm and rich, carrying the contentment of a man who had everything he'd ever wanted. I'm terrified and excited in equal measure. The thought of a little person who's half you and half me running around this place, it's almost too wonderful to believe. They'll be spoiled rotten by the entire pack, Sarah predicted. Elena's already knitting enough baby clothes to outfit triplets, and Marcus has started carving a crib that looks more like a throne. As the first child born to the United Pack, they deserve to be spoiled. They'll be a symbol of everything we've built here. No pressure for the poor kid, Sarah said with a laugh. Just carry the hopes and dreams of 400 wolves on your tiny shoulders. They'll be strong enough, Kale said confidently. With you as their mother, how could they be anything else? The baby chose that moment to deliver a particularly sharp kick, making both parents gasp. Through the mate bond, Sarah felt Kale's wonder and fierce protectiveness intensify to almost overwhelming levels. Easy, Papa Wolf, she said teasingly. Save some of that protective energy for when they're actually born and getting into trouble. Our child is going to be a terror, isn't it? Kale asked with resigned affection. With your tactical mind and my stubbornness, plus whatever supernatural gifts they inherit from both bloodlines. Elena thinks they might be unusually powerful, Sarah admitted. Something about the combination of two alpha bloodlines that were never meant to mix. The magical resonance is apparently off the charts. Meaning? Meaning our child might be the first true Alpha Supreme born in over 3 centuries. Someone capable of commanding absolute loyalty from any wolf, regardless of pack affiliation. Kale was quiet for a long moment, processing the implications. An Alpha Supreme would be a target from the moment of birth, coveted by every ambitious pack leader and feared by anyone who valued their independence. "We'll protect them," he said finally. "Whatever it takes." "We will," Sarah agreed. "But more than that, we'll teach them to use their gifts wisely, to lead with compassion instead of fear, to build rather than destroy. Like their parents. We hope." As full darkness settled over the mountains, they moved inside, to the warmth of their chambers. The room had been modified extensively since Sarah moved in, expanded to include a nursery, equipped with secure communication devices for managing their growing territory, decorated with gifts from allied packs that spoke to the respect they'd earned across the region. The Silverpine Alpha sent another invitation to visit their territory, Kale mentioned as they prepared for bed. "She's particularly interested in discussing our integration protocols for refugee wolves." "Tourism?" Sarah asked with amusement. "Are we becoming a tourist destination for peace-seeking alphas?" "Apparently. Marcus has fielded 17 requests this month for consultation visits from pack leaders who want to replicate our success. Should we be flattered or concerned?" "Both, probably." Kale helped her into bed, his hands gentle as they supported her changing body. "But it means what we've built here is working. Really working not just for us but as a model others can follow." Sarah settled against the pillows, automatically making room for Kale beside her. Their nightly routine had evolved to accommodate her pregnancy. Extra pillows for support, a careful arrangement that kept pressure off her growing belly, Kale's protective arm curved around her shoulders. "Do you ever miss it?" she asked quietly. "The simplicity of when it was just war? When the choices were clear and the goals were straightforward?" "Never," Kale said immediately. "War is simple because it reduces everything to survival. But this, building something lasting, creating a legacy for our children, watching former enemies become family, this is infinitely more rewarding. Even when we're dealing with fishing rights disputes and trade negotiations. Especially then. Because every boring administrative decision we make is a choice for peace over conflict, for growth over destruction." Kale pressed a kiss to the top of her head. "I'd rather spend my life mediating property disputes than burying pack members." Through the mate bond, Sarah felt the absolute truth of his words. This man who had once been a warlord driven by grief and rage had transformed into something far more powerful, a leader who built rather than destroyed, who protected through strength rather than intimidation. "I love you," she said, the words carrying the weight of everything they'd been through together. "I love you too," Kale replied. "More every day, if that's possible." "It's possible. I feel it too." As they settled into sleep, the baby stirring gently between them, Sarah reflected on the journey that had brought them to this moment. 1.5 years ago, she'd been a refugee warrior with nothing left to lose. Now she was a Luna, a pack alpha, a wife, and soon to be a mother. She led hundreds of wolves, commanded respect across the region, and had helped create something that would outlast her own lifetime. But more than any of that, she was loved. Completely, unconditionally, fiercely loved by a man who saw her as his equal partner in everything that mattered. The moon goddess had indeed blessed them, though the path to that blessing had been painted with blood and tears and impossible choices. But every moment of pain had led them here, to this perfect life they'd built together from the ashes of old hatred. "Sweet dreams, little one," Sarah whispered, her hand curved over her belly. "When you're born, you'll inherit a world that's better than the one your parents knew. A world where love wins over hate, where former enemies can become family, where peace is possible if people are brave enough to reach for it." The baby kicked once, as if in agreement, and through the mate bond, Sarah felt Kale's deep contentment as he drifted toward sleep. Outside their window, The full moon shone down on a territory at peace, on settlements where former enemies shared meals and raised children together, on a pact that had become a beacon of hope for the entire region. The war was over. The future was beginning. And Sarah and Cale Thornwick, bound by moonlight and sealed by love, faced it together as they always would, as true partners in every sense of the word. The moon goddess had chosen well, pairing two warriors who were strong enough to fight for peace and wise enough to build something beautiful from the ruins of the past. Their love story had become a legend, whispered around pack fires and shared as proof that enemies could become lovers, that hatred could transform into hope, that the moon goddess's gifts were always worth the price required to claim them. But for Sarah and Cale, it wasn't a legend at all. It was simply Tuesday night, in a life filled with ordinary magic and the extraordinary blessing of being exactly where they belonged. Together, forever, bound by moonlight, sealed by choice, and united by a love that had conquered everything fate could throw at them.
The end.